Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the special meeting of the Cupertino City Council. It's May 14th, 2024. We are starting at 6:47, and we will start right away with Madam City Clerk, if you could do the roll call.
Councilmember Chow?
Here.
Councilmember Moore?
Here.
Councilmember Way?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fruin?
Here.
Mayor Mohan?
Here. Okay, so this is a public hearing, and the subject is the sixth cycle housing element and associated general plan amendments. We will start with the staff presentation, Madam City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And with great pleasure, I want to introduce the housing element adoption public hearing for Council to consider tonight. Before we do that, I really wanted to give a special shout out to the CDD team and also our consultant to bring us to where we are today. And also the diligence for Council and the community members to get us this close to the finish line. So thank you, everyone. And without further ado, Luke, why don't you take it away?
Okay. Thank you, Pamela. So this may look familiar again. We were here 4 weeks ago on April 16th for a study session, which was just about a week after we learned from HCD that our housing element was found in conditional compliance with state housing law. So tonight's meeting is different in the sense that we'll be looking to take action to get adoption of the housing element and the general plan amendments that would go with that to enable its adoption. I do want to, before I get in, say that tonight's presentation, just because I've been doing this so often, we're going to be divvying it up between Pew and I. We also have Terry McCracken with PlaceWorks, who would be here should there be any questions about the environmental aspects of the project, not necessarily the housing element itself. So we'll get in again. I think a lot of this is going to look familiar, but I also think that based on a lot of the comments and questions we receive, it's always important to go over the basics and how we got here tonight. So we'll be giving an overview of the housing element, a summary of the outreach, going over our housing sites and the RENA, policies and strategies, Housing and Community Development Department review and comments, environmental review, the associated general plan amendments that go with the housing element, the Planning Commission recommendation from the meeting we had on April 29th, and then staff's recommendation. And also at the end, and in addition to next steps, I put the project update on there because I think all of the city council members and some of the public are aware that the end of last week we had received a letter from Valley Church at Stelling and Homestead. There are 4 parcels that have been on our housing element inventory for say the last 2 years, where we had owner interest. We thought there was some desire to go forward with that. When we received the letter late last week, it was something of a surprise, but we've had a chance to meet with the Valley Church representatives. I believe one of them is here tonight. And I think their request is that they not go forward, as their letter was pretty clear, as a housing element site. So we'll also be talking about that and how that potentially affects the housing element. Okay, so we'll start with our overview. And again, I apologize for anything looking too familiar, but I think it's important to cover this. The housing element is one of the general plan's required elements, and it's the one that's updated the most frequently every 8 years, which is what we're into right now. This is the 6th cycle, which covers 2023 to 2031, so we're a little over a year into that planning period right now. The certification deadline was actually January 31 of last year. I think people are all aware of that, so Cupertino, like many other communities, has gone past the deadline on getting certification in place. We did, however, get our letter on April 10, which is a pretty good indication of where we stand right now. And the certifying agency is the State Housing and Community Development Department, for anybody who's not aware of that at this point. Okay, we just wanted to keep this slide in here to show the contents of the housing element. So you essentially have these 5 areas in the red rectangles: housing needs assessment, your assessment of fair housing, identifying constraints to housing development, and then your resources and sites inventory and policies and programs. The 3 items on the left are really sort of the foundation that feed into the 2 on the right. You're essentially looking at what your community's housing needs are, looking at impediments to fair housing and constraints to housing development, things that could range from infrastructure to fees, and really looking at all of that information then to develop what is your current housing element going to be. So obviously you identify housing sites, and then you build policies and programs around those to try to get that, to bring your housing to realization. We could go on to the next slide from here. As I said at the outset too, there are other updates. We've focused a lot on the housing element itself because that's been the driver of this project. But there are other general plan changes that will go along with that. Land use and the land use appendices, this is all being done really for internal consistency, as well as mobility. The mobility element, we're doing this really solely to adopt and implement the housing element. It's not really seen as an opportunity to expand the scope and kind of rewrite other general plan elements, but really to get the housing element in conformance with the other general plan elements at this time. Specifically, a conforming rezoning, that is really what HCD has conditioned this project on, is that we need to be able to rezone our priority housing sites, which we'll be talking about and showing shortly. Once the rezoning is in place, we have essentially then complied with the condition HCD has put on us to conform with, to be in conformance with state law. We also have a health and safety element, which will follow. That is a state law requirement to be updated as well. And we should be this summer through the remainder of the year working on objective design standards, which will work in unison with the housing element. Okay, I want to cover this again is the sixth cycle, what we're currently in versus the fifth cycle, to again kind of document how much more involved this has been and why we've had this 3-year process versus what was considerably less lengthy in the past. As most of you probably know if you're following this, our regional housing needs allocation number, which is the total number of units that the city needs to accommodate in this housing element cycle, went up more than 4 times between the last housing element when it was just over 1,000. And adding to the difficulty of finding the sites is Cupertino, like most Bay Area cities, is built out. So you really don't have undevelopment sites to identify to build future housing. You're really relying on redevelopment sites. In the previous housing cycle, there were just 5 sites identified in order to meet the 1,000 units. Now we're looking at 62 properties, which comprise 36 development sites. 70% of the properties are 50 units per acre or more in residential density. So that's really a big change for what's been a suburban community for, since its outset decades ago. The housing element also has added, in addition to having a much higher arena, it has added additional requirements in policies and programs and a greater accountability to produce housing. It's not just a matter of accommodating, but continuing to work towards getting that housing built. There are standards on site selection that hadn't existed in the prior cycle, and cities very often have less discretion in improving housing developments. Affirmatively further fair housing, which we've talked about a lot and we'll touch on again briefly. That concept is something that really permeates through this cycle and is a really integral part of the housing element itself. And of course, there's been more outreach and inclusion on this, as will show the number of meetings that staff has had in the last few years. Again, I'm hoping that this isn't something the city has to deal with, but we always like to go over what non-compliance means, since currently we are non-compliant with state law, not having been certified in January 31 of last year. The city remains subject to things like the builder's remedy, loss of local land use control, lawsuits and attorney fees, which is something we experienced and had a settlement in January of this year, ineligibility for grant funding, other financial penalties or court-issued fines, increasingly streamlined ministerial approval of projects, which kind of feeds into the first bullet, that your loss of local land use control, and even things such as court receivership for cities that delay getting in compliance with state law. Affirmatively further fair housing was passed in Assembly Bill 686 in 2018. I think you can all read the text, but what this largely means is for high or highest resources cities like Cupertino and much of the west side of Santa Clara County, is you're looking at your housing element from a regional perspective, because it's essentially considered a very desirable community with a lot of resources great school districts, and a lot of opportunity areas that other cities don't uniformly have. So this gives more of a regional perspective to the city's housing element. You're not just focusing on existing residents, but trying to take into account people who work in the community but can't afford to live here, and other special needs groups in terms of identifying housing and housing policies that would enable them to live in the city. And given that, meeting your RENA alone, just being able to show that you can provide the number of units that HED has assigned, that alone would not satisfy AFFH requirements. So that's why we have policies in place like HE 136, our missing middle strategy, which we talked about 4 weeks ago, and has been the subject of some questions. We can talk about that further as well. But this is just something to keep in mind, that being a high resource city kind of shifts the perspective of what the housing element is supposed to achieve. It's not just for existing residents. And the last bullet, I just want to note, we did have 3 community meetings in 2022 specifically to address this issue. Okay, we'll move on to the summary of community outreach that's been done. Okay, this fairly complicated slide, what it really shows is that 3 years ago we began this process with overviews and study sessions on essentially some of the stuff we're already covering now, is what's the housing element for, and then moving into more detail and getting our first consultant on board and going out to the community to initially in January 2022 start identifying housing sites. The 2022, that year, we had about 25 meetings before the City Council, Planning Commission, Housing Commission, an advisory committee, which included council members as well. And by the end of that year, we had received a lot of input specifically on identifying housing sites. It wasn't until early 2023 where we had focused on getting our first draft housing element prepared. That was submitted just after the certification deadline on February 3 of 2023. And from there, we had a 3-month interval before we received comments back from HCD. Unsurprisingly, we knew we had a fairly rough draft, but we got comments back from them in May of 2023, and then worked from there to try to refine that draft. In July of 2023, we had a meeting before the City Council to get additional direction for how we would be able to comply with finding new sites and developing policy framework for the second draft of the housing element. I think that guidance from City Council paid off very well. We submitted a second draft in the middle of October. And from there, we started working fairly closely with HCD directly. And as I said, within 6 months of submittal of the second draft, on April 10th, we had our certification letter from HCD. Now we'll go back over to the sites inventory, which is probably the key part and the focal point of the discussion on this project overall. This slide, which you've seen before, shows the ABAG region, which is the 9-county Bay Area, and shows we had a housing need identified of over 440,000 units. Cupertino has a small portion, about 1% of that. And the breakdown of housing units by income category, which will be seen on the next slide, is very similar to that shown on the ABAG slide. This slide as well, I'm sure you're all quite familiar with. This looks at what our 6-cycle RENA is. So you can see that the above moderate or market rate units is still the largest category individually, but very low income, low and moderate make up about 56–57% of the total units. So that's not surprising in communities where affordability is an issue. And the note below where we're talking about buffer, we currently right now in the housing element with the 62 sites have a capacity for housing based on the density shown of a little over 6,200 units. So our buffer is about 35% right now. I know we've talked about this before, but that's something to keep in mind, and we'll have a little more detail on later slides with, by income category, what the buffer really means. We also want to touch on pipeline because this is actually a pretty significant housing element concept for the city of Cupertino. Pipeline projects are projects that essentially have their entitlements but they're not built yet. We have not seen the construction go up, so these are projects that need no further approvals from the city. Certainly the Valco site was a significant one, but there are others. So based on our current draft of our housing element, the city's essentially getting credit for 2,450 pipeline units. So over half of URENA is coming from projects that are already approved but not constructed. Good. To sort of go back to take us to where we were in 2022 and how we identified sites. The initial criteria we started with was what HCD identified. So we really looked at properties that met the half-acre to 10-acre size criteria and that lacked any kind of environmental or geological constraints that would limit housing development. Owner interest is something we tried to solicit from property owners. From January, I believe, through July, we actively had owner interest on the city's website. It is a key factor in HCD's consideration of whether a site is a viable development candidate, but it is not required. So I think we have about a half dozen sites where we did not have owner interest, but by far the majority of the sites do. In the Council and Planning Commission's discussions in 2022 and trying to identify sites, largely because we did have large projects such as Valco and the Hamptons approved. In the northeast portion of the city, there was more of a desire to disperse housing throughout the city, have less of it east of De Anza Boulevard and south of Highway 85. And I know another consideration given declining school enrollment was to try to counteract that declining enrollment through the location of housing sites. We also initially had some sites that would have had pretty significant displacement of residents, say redevelopment of apartment projects. We do not have anything like that in our current housing element because there was a desire from Planning Commission and Council to minimize displacement to existing residents. After we had submitted our first draft to HCD and realized not all of the sites that had been approved by the City Council at the end of August 2022 were going to be considered viable by HCD, we then took kind of a policy approach to where can we identify additional sites. So we looked at things like AB 32 and SB 37 from over a decade ago that started linking land use and transportation more strongly. Regional plans, which also did the same thing, Plan Bay Area 2050 and the Regional Transportation Plan, which are again looking to intensify corridors, link housing and jobs, and essentially have a minimal footprint that could help in terms of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions as well. Assembly Bill 2011, which went into effect in July last year. We have discussed that here, and we tried to have that be something that really framed identification of sites as of last July. That bill, if you're not familiar with it, would allow for higher density residential development, essentially 40 to 60 unit per acre minimums along major transportation corridors such as Stevens Creek, De Anza, or Homestead. And those sites would be able to develop as housing without rezoning or without being subject to CEQA. We've not had any applications that have come in under that legislation as yet, but again, all of those sites would have the ability to develop as housing consistent with the requirements in the bill. So our current site selection strategy as of last July and what we followed through in the subsequent submittal of the housing element was really based on new state law realities, specifically AB 2011, which we talked about, legislation that linked transportation policy, housing, and jobs, and aligning with the existing regional plans for the Bay Area. Also, the city's existing general plan, first land use policy in there talks about intensification of development along transportation corridors. That's land use policy 1.1. And the city's own climate action plan were things that kind of shaped our perspective as to where housing sites should be located. Also, we had PlaceWorks as our consultant on board at this time who had a lot of experience working on housing elements. Their input was also involved in terms of which sites were going to be likely candidates to be approved by HCD. So this slide, which fortunately has nicely labeled streets, go back. This shows all of the priority housing sites. So you can see they are still fairly dispersed around the city, but not so much on the lower density west side. At the north end, it's Stelling and Homestead, where you have development on both sides of Stelling Road. On the left side, you can probably see there's an X through that property, and that is the Valley Church site, which I talked about at the beginning, in which you received the letter. So those are the 4 parcels which we currently have in our draft, which totals the 62 parcels. There are 4 individual parcels there that are either undeveloped tennis courts, a sand volleyball court, or parking. So our recommendation tonight, based on the receipt of the letter and follow-up conversations with the church representatives, is that we would not be proceeding on those sites. So those would be coming off, reducing our parcels, our priority housing sites, by 4, and we'll show what that would do to our housing numbers on later slides. But so just wanted to be clear with the recommendation from staff tonight would be that those parcels not proceed and have their land use designation changed or be rezoned at a subsequent hearing. The council does, as the legislative body for the city, though, have the option to rezone sites. And again, owner interest is not required, but it just seemed prudent that based on the letter, this is not likely to be developed as housing by 2031. Okay, this is a more detailed slide I had referred to, where it shows the city's RENA and it breaks things down by category. And I think the 2 columns on the right, total capacity and surplus, are the ones really to concentrate on. That surplus is really our buffer. And this slide is showing where we're at today with all 62 properties. So the Valley Church site is included in this. This is what our draft housing element currently looks like. So you can see we have a buffer or total surplus of over 1,600 units in the lower right corner. By far the majorities are above moderate or market rate housing, which is typical. It's much easier to get a surplus at the market rate housing category than it is in the low or moderate. And for the purposes of this slide, very low and low are grouped together as they are in the housing element. So this is when we say we have a 35% buffer, it's based on this number, 1,638 units over our RENA of 4,588. So if you go to the next slide, this is based on removing the 4 parcels on the Valley Church property. This is what it would do, is we would still have a surplus, but you can see in the low and moderate income category that surplus has dropped because this was a higher density site. It was projected at 65 to 80 units per acre. We still have a surplus, we have a large one in above moderate or market rate, and our total is still at 1294, about a 28% buffer. So in terms of just being within the range of 20-30%, which is an HCD recommendation, not a requirement, we're fine. But it does show that our surplus for low and moderate income housing has reduced. This would not be an issue with HCD because we have a surplus. But I just wanted you to be aware of the removal of those 4 parcels, how that would affect where we're at with the current draft and where we would be if those 4 parcels are not included. Programs and policies. So I think I kind of ended my speaking portion for now, though I suspect I'll have a few things to weigh in later. So I'll turn it over to Pew Ghosh at this point.
Good evening, City Council. Thank you, Luke. So as Luke had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there are 2 parts to the housing element that kind of really impact people's lives. One is the sites inventory, where you can see physical changes to the community. And then we have the other portion, which is the programs and policies, which impact in a different way. They impact the community in a different way. And as part of the housing element, there are certain required programs and policies, or certain areas that these programs and policies have to address. Programs to provide adequate housing sites, to assist lower income housing development, address housing constraints, conserve, improve, and expand housing stock, affirmatively further fair housing, preserve at-risk units, and programs specifically for ADUs or second units. And I'll go through each of these categories in the next few slides. The draft housing element includes programs to provide adequate housing sites, which is essentially the identification of the how the arena is going to be accommodated, which, as Luke said, in the what we're recommending tonight is the 58 parcels with the 35 development sites. In order to do that, we also need to create new land use designations to ensure that the arena can be accommodated, because some of those sites are being upzoned to higher densities. With regard to programs to assist lower income housing developments, there is policies in there to support grant applications. Basically, the city would support any for affordable housing developments. Staff would provide technical support for making sure that affordable housing developments can be built. Also, issuance of the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability for our BMR affordable housing funds. And all of those would be things that staff here at the city would do. In addition to that, there are, based on the housing constraints analysis, there are certain programs that were identified to address those. And those include adopting objective standards to make sure that housing developments are reviewed against objective standards that are measurable and quantifiable and not necessarily arbitrary. Continue fee waivers for affordable units and or 100% affordable housing projects, and also evaluating parking standards to make sure that they're in alignment with where the development industry is. Additionally, there are programs to conserve, improve, and expand on the city's housing stock. As I mentioned before, because we are creating new densities, we have to create new development standards to support those densities, and that is the creation of a new R4 zoning district. One of the early comments that we received actually from one of the council members up here was to promote options for multi-generational households and house sharing programs, and so we included that as a policy as well. Also, continuing and implementing a BMR program. That is also another policy that would improve our housing stock, particularly in the lower income housing categories. Also disallowing conversion of multifamily units to single family homes, because that is a lot of what we see and how we lose some of the units in our community as well, because those are affordable by design. Also using CDBG funds for preservation and conservation and improvements to existing housing stock, making sure that funding that is coming in is applied towards people that do need the money to preserve their housing. Other programs specifically, and this is a new category, the affirmatively furthering fair housing. We basically would upzone sites adequately to, of course, accommodate our arena, support teacher housing and extremely low-income housing projects, continue to support the development of ADUs, which has actually been the basis of our moderate income housing for so far, and also adopt missing middle policies, which offer opportunities with a modest increases in density within the neighborhoods, which is what HCD wants to see in high or highest resource communities. Also, putting in programs to preserve at-risk units. We have existing BMR units that are at risk of conversion to market rate. So how the city can support that, and that would be to meet affordable housing operators annually to see when those units might convert to market rate and what the city can offer in order to make sure that they don't, or how do we handle displacement if that does occur. Programs for ADUs and second units continue to offer streamlined pre-approved plans for people so that they can go off the shelf and install those ADUs without jumping through hoops and designing ADUs. Evaluate and participate in local and regional efforts on ADU programs, because we are required regionally to come up with a lot of this housing stock. So how can we capitalize on regional efforts to participate and push these programs forward? So we've committed to all of these things in the draft housing element. Moving along to HCD review and comments, and I know Luke touched upon it a little bit, and I just wanted to go in a little bit on how we got to this point. As Luke mentioned, we submitted our first draft to HCD early last year, right after the deadline for adoption of our housing element. We received a 16-page letter on our very rough first draft. In October, we went ahead after a bunch of changes, made a second submittal to HCD. There was an informal meeting with HCD, which resulted in a revised second draft, which was submitted to them in November. Shortly thereafter, we received a much shorter letter, a 5-page letter from HCD on the draft that was submitted. After that, we went ahead and made edits to that second draft, and a third draft was submitted. Once again, following an informal meeting with HCD, we got our conditional compliance letter with some very targeted edits to that third draft, and I'll go over those shortly. The second draft was a substantial rewrite of the first draft. All the analysis was pretty much revised. The sites inventory was updated based on the council direction, consultant advice, and just getting a sense of what HCD would accept or not. Existing policies and strategies were revised based on the update to the analyses, and also new policies and strategies were added in the first draft were revised or replaced to address state law and gaps based on the analysis that was generated. With the third draft, there were very targeted edits actually to the second draft, because there were only some edits made to the sites and the sites inventory based on HCD comments, and there were some refinements to the missing middle strategy that HCD wanted to see. So those are just examples of the very minor details that we had to iron out with them. So environmental assessment, and this is something that I know is a subject that has been much talked about. Because of a settlement agreement that the city had to enter into as a result of a lawsuit that was filed against the city, there was a stipulated judgment that the city entered into in January, which established a schedule to complete our housing element update in compliance with state law. And as part of that settlement, and part of the government code, essentially, it became clear to all of us that all actions related to adoption of the housing element and rezoning are exempt from CEQA. So this entire project is exempt from CEQA. However, an environmental assessment has been prepared and is being proposed for adoption tonight as part of the general plan. All the topics that were evaluated in the environmental assessment are the same as those that would have been identified had an environmental impact report been prepared. The content and the look of the environmental assessment is very similar to what a draft, what an EIR would look like, and covers all these policy areas. And any significant environmental impacts are avoided, minimized, rectified, reduced, eliminated, or compensated. That was the conclusion that kind of came out of that environmental assessment. And just as a side note, the general plan and the Munich Code basically have policies and strategies and requirements which protect, preserve, and enhance the environment. And so that is all incorporated within our policy documents. And to the extent that there weren't things that were addressed, those have been incorporated and are being presented to the Council for adoption tonight. So as a result of which you see some edits to the mobility element in order to make sure that we can minimize and any impacts that the environmental assessment found. So in general, the environmental assessment concluded that at a program level, there are some significant and unavoidable impacts for air quality, greenhouse gas, and transportation. But again, like I mentioned, the mitigation measures that have been proposed and are part of this package do reduce those to the extent practicable. It is also possible that in future projects are proposed that there are no project level impacts. And so that is just part of what the environmental assessment concludes. And it also concludes that there are no additional mitigation measures that are available at this time. And so everything that is available has been presented and packaged for adoption tonight. There are, as Luke mentioned, some associated general plan amendments. There are changes to the land use and community design element and land use designations. Because there are new density requirements. So there are some text changes that were made to these two chapters. They also address state law requirements and also internal consistency between the housing element and the land use element. And also as a result, there are some changes to figures and such because of the housing inventory. Again, as I mentioned in Chapter 5, which is mobility, there are text changes to minimize environmental impacts. And the general plan land use map had to be amended to make sure that the conforming changes to reflect the housing element were made to it. And I did want to note that there were that the general plan land use map was also reissued as a desk item for council's consideration tonight to reflect the change for the church site. The Planning Commission met on April 29th and recommended that the council adopt the draft resolution on a 3-2 vote, with a minor change to remove one of the sites which the HCD did not want included in the RENA, and which was the Dish and Dash site, number 48, that was already removed as part of the draft that was presented to the council. The missing middle strategy and the parkland dedication fee study were discussed at length at that planning commission meeting. However, we did want to note that the HCD requirements were to address AFFH and housing constraints. Both of these requirements were included in the draft housing element because of comments that we received from HCD. Also, 8 members of the public spoke, and they spoke on a variety of topics, including the validity of the RENA numbers. There was some discussion about the missing middle strategy and parking impacts as a result of that. There was some confusion about the income restrictions for BMR AHF funds for residential rehab projects. There were also a request to include programs for seniors, which are already incorporated in the draft housing element. There was a request to include prevailing wage requirements in development, and there were some questions and concerns about the environmental review. I'm close to the conclusion of this presentation. I wanted to mention that the recommendation tonight is to adopt the draft resolution. It removes Site 48 from the draft housing element, as previously mentioned, and also, as a desk item, removes Sites 13 to 16, which are the Valley Church sites, and also adopt the various chapters and appendices that have been presented for consideration tonight, and the changes to the land use map, which have been reissued as a desk item tonight to the council. In terms of next steps, we basically anticipate that after the council adopts the housing element tonight, that we present zoning changes to the Planning Commission in early June, which will then be presented to council in July, and with a second reading also in July. We also hope to begin preparing objective design standards to make sure that housing developments would comply with those, and adopt those objective standards by the fall of this year, and moving into implementation of the housing element with the APR being submitted, and we'll have a more comprehensive report at that point. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and we're ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Luke, and thank you, Pio. Let's bring it back to council. Each council member will get 5 minutes to ask the staff any questions on their report. So, who will start? Okay, Councilmember Way, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for the reports. I want to ask 2 questions. The first one is the Westport project. Will the 80 units of market rate housing, 48 senior, and the assisted living, are they going to be accounted toward our 2023-2031 housing elements?
All the new housing will count towards that, and I believe Westport was identified as a pipeline project as well. I took a bad look. We will definitely get credit for the
that.
Units, yes.
Okay.
Or Westport may be a case where there's a portion that was pipeline because of when the building permits were issued.
Right.
I think some were issued in the 5th cycle, with the majority coming in this cycle, so not all of that. But anything, whether it's identified as a priority housing site or not, any new housing unit, we get credit towards our RENA.
Okay.
So we'll probably get credit for a lot of sites that are not priority housing sites, but housing would be built on them.
Understood. So even if we lose the Valley, the Valley Church 4 parcels, we lose some units. This actually is being built already, so they will count toward our housing stock in the credit for the housing stock for 2023, 2030, even though it's not in the housing element.
Right, correct.
Understood.
I mean, it kind of works 2 ways. If you're making sort of your best estimate to accommodate housing, you identify sites, you identify densities, and you need to have that work out to meet your RENA. But in order to actually count towards did you meet it, you're going to get credit for anything that's getting built that is housing. Any new unit will count towards that.
So same with the Marina Food. If it's being built within 2023, 2031, it will count toward our housing element, even though they're not including the
Correct.
housing. Yeah.
Yes, that is a pipeline project, and so all of the units that are credited, or if there were to be additional units at that site in the future, we would get credit for whatever is built.
Understood. Okay, thank you. I have 2 minutes left.
Yes. Councilmember Chow.
So first, I submitted a list of questions for the study session last time. No answers were given because I'm told there was no staff report. This time, I submitted the same questions again and some additional questions based on the material tonight. No answers were given for any of my questions. So how would I be able to get answers?
Councilmember Chow, so we did issue a supplemental last night. We did not itemize all your questions given that we were really working on the time sensitivity to get the memo out. So we hope that the spirit of the questions, the answers provided enough basis for your questions. If not, more than happy to walk you through today.
I see the supplemental report has included all the questions, but I didn't find the answers. So.
I believe there was a
Yeah.
memo that provided a background on CEQA, your questions on why we're not doing a CEQA, and also
No, I
the
didn't ask
ADUs.
that question. Oh, never mind. My time is limited. So it's very hard to ask all of this now with time limit. Question, some cities have adopted policies that allow forever BMI units in their housing element. So I wonder if, so that they don't expire after 55 years or 99 years. Has this been considered?
I'm not aware of that. I think that to my knowledge, there's always a time limit. Generally, 99 years is the
okay,
upper
that's
limit
fine.
of that.
So why do we have some citywide policies in the mobility element that's not applicable for, I thought if any policy we adopt will probably be only applied to the housing element sites that we adopt. But why are we adopting new citywide policies in the old mobility? Are they required by the housing element?
I think the policies changed there were, yes, they're required by the housing element to have the general plan stay internally consistent, but also the mobility element, we updated a lot of the text related to vehicle miles travel standards because that is the standard by which you review traffic and transportation impacts. That's what's used under CEQA, and the mobility element in the general plan still had a lot of reference
but then
to the.
I know VMT is included, but there are proposals of things that's not part of EMP, but are potential ways to reduce VMT. Those were never discussed on the council agenda. We never received any public comment on those. Why are those included?
Let me take a stab at it. So I believe, so the intent for a mobility element revision is to align the housing element changes with the mobility element.
But
so we're not
changing. Which
changing.
portion of the housing element would require us to?
I believe they're in the.
It's in my question.
It's in the policies and programs that's being introduced in the housing element. So we're trying to bring a consistency in all of the elements in the general plan. So we're not changing or modifying the mobility element other than realigning the mobility element with the housing
For
element.
example, discourage single occupancy vehicle travel
Correct.
within the city boundary.
That
That usually applies for highway travel. But this is a new thing that we are going to discourage a single occupancy vehicle in Cupertino.
I believe that's part of the VMT monitoring program. That's part of the housing element discussion.
Is that part of the draft housing element? There is a specific reference on that.
Well, I believe the city already has policies on discouraging auto use really in general by providing transit, bike paths,
Yeah, auto
pedestrian
use in
mobility.
general,
So
but-
I think it's really just going towards that and updating the
Okay.
language to
I
make
think
it
I have
more
1 minute
consistent.
left. That's okay. So the growth rate on the environmental assessment is, I find the language simply copies mostly from the 2014 EIR, which I read at the time. And at that time, that was for anticipated 22% growth, 4,400 22 units in 25 years, about less than 1% a year. But the current housing element is proposing growth rate would be about 3 or 4 times of that. It's 35% in 8 years. And at that time, a lot of the police and fire, and those are the reason were that the current policies would build up capacity over time, over 25 years. But now we are looking at the 3-4 time growth rates. So how would the same policy provide the capacity for a much higher growth rate?
Okay, well, the reason the prior general plan AIR is referenced is we had started work on a subsequent EIR to that general plan. So we had a scoping meeting a year ago, but for the stipulated judgment in the settlement, we would have prepared an environmental impact report, and that was going to be based on the EIR done for the general plan.
I know, but the same reason doesn't apply here because the growth rate is triple or quadrupled.
For program level documents like that, you're looking at a time span, but you're not looking at phased development. So the development could happen in 2 years or 20 years. It's just looking at the total amount of development.
Yeah,
so the housing element has a different build out
My
period.
time is up, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from Councilmember Moore?
I have a procedure question. Are we only being allowed 5 minutes for questions in our entirety for each council member?
We are talking about 5 minutes to ask the staff any questions they have on the report that they presented. We will get more time at a later time.
Thank you. If we can have yes or no answers, that would be very helpful. So I already know the answer to this one, but I want to just ask away. Was jobs to housing taken into consideration with this housing element?
In what way?
For instance, the Valco SB 35 project has 1.9 million square feet of office. If we consider that, it puts us at a deficit of about 3,000 residential units while using a housing law, which is going to essentially worsen the housing shortage. So with regards to that project in particular.
I believe the previous EIR for the general plan accommodated for that office development.
Okay, so
it was beyond the amount of Valco, so Valco was included in that.
Okay, so for this housing element, we are not looking at the jobs to housing ratio with regards to that project. Okay, so when I'm looking at the moderate rate build, our inclusionary requirement is 20% for townhouses. Is that correct? Let me start that one over. If someone is going to come in and build a townhouse project, their inclusionary requirement is 20% moderate rate. Okay, so those types of units are not going to help us with the VLI and LI, which, please correct me if I'm wrong, if with regards to SB 35, they look at how many VLI and LI units that we are building. Okay, so right now the market is looking more towards townhomes and single family. I've noticed that I'm not seeing SB 9s being built. I'm seeing like 4,000 square feet single family homes replacing those lots. So do you have some concern about very low income and low income multifamily units going to get built within this 8-year cycle?
I would say they're the tougher element, and the slide we showed we have a lower surplus for both moderate and the lower income categories. But you are correct, is that the townhome and owner-occupied development, the target 20% is applied to moderate income, not low or very low.
Okay, thank you. Also, when I'm looking at the grand total, including the moderate and market rate units, when we have about 1,900 very low and low income units to build, and we're only allowed to ask the developer to build 15%. In order to get to 1,900, the grand total's really over 6,200. I'm backing it out is about 12,000 units we would actually need to build if 15% of those are going to, equate to the 1,900. Am I doing that math right?
Yeah, our 15% would not get us there alone to get us to that over 40-some% in the low and very low. You would be dependent on getting some affordable housing projects that are much higher than that to come in to help.
Okay, thank you. Now, I did watch the Planning Commission meeting on the housing element as well, and it's my understanding that from HCD that we really cannot change what is within this housing element. We can't reduce the amount of buffer that we have, and we really cannot reduce the policies that we have. We could go higher and less restrictive with both, but is that pretty accurate?
That is accurate. I believe on the 4 parcels we talked about with the church, if those were removed, though, that would not be an issue because it was requested from the property owner and because we can still have a 28% buffer and show a surplus in all the income categories. But you're correct. Changing policies or changing the document would require additional review.
Okay, so it seems somewhat like take it or leave it. And I have a question about LU 3.3.10. If you could answer what the maximum height is. We have a 30-foot mentioned, but I can't tell what the actual maximum is. And we're, with regards to the environmental assessment, were cumulative impacts addressed because you have every city around us with these very large numbers, and we will very likely have a need for additional infrastructure such as sewage treatment plants and things of that nature.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have 3.310 in front of me, so I'm looking for the text on that. If I could just clarify, is that the land use element 3.310 or the housing element?
Thank you for the question. It's the land use, allow construction of buildings taller than 30 feet in neighborhoods only if the buildings abut an arterial or major collector or if allowed by state law. I could not find a maximum. I was wondering what the maximum is. Thank you.
If you could give us 1 minute, please. So the heights in that case would be determined by land use figure LU2, which is a citywide map that designates the heights by area.
And through the mayor, were I to use density bonus law, I could pick any height I wanted?
If you're subject to density bonus law, you can waive height restrictions. That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Fruin.
So for the sake of clarity, the site IDs you're referring to for the Valley Church are IDs 13, 14, 15, and 16, yes?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have a plan of action with regard to what to say to HCD?
We will be presenting that to them. I know they received the letter already directly, so I think the letter alone was a pretty clear indication, and then our discussions following up with the site's representatives that they are not going to be pursuing housing. So I think it just needs to be clear to them the basis for the removal is not a staff decision to reduce that, it's a property owner, and that we can demonstrate that our numbers still work, though it does put our surplus at a lower level at the lower income categories.
Got it. But you haven't yet had a conversation with HCD. I realize it's only been a few days and it's hard to get on calendar, so.
Right. I'm hoping in the next 2 weeks
Okay.
that we can do this. But we do not want to submit something to HCD that has a change that we cannot state the basis for that change.
Precisely. I'd hate for us to get all the way through rezoning and then discover, oh, you need more sites or something like that and start back over. That would be, I think, a very unfortunate result given all the work that's gone into this and how much effort you've put into it. As I read the letter, there is a lot of description there with respect to not wanting to wind up with having, a legal non-conforming use on the site. Could an overlay solve that problem?
It may be able to. I think just on the short notice we got, that's the difficult thing, because I would want to make sure that anything we add is not also seen as additive or altering the housing element where it would require additional HCD review. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the property owner because I think they're here, but I think it is fair to say that the legal non-conforming issue is a factor in their decision.
Got it. Is that something you think you could explore?
Yes, I would be happy to explore it because I said that was 345 total sites based on realistic capacity. It was high density, so that does hit us in terms of the loss of units.
Got it. And then again, for the sake of clarity, this housing element draft is a floor, not a ceiling, yes?
Correct.
Okay. So this is not a take it or leave it situation. It is we can do more than this if we want to. I see that I have 2:30 left. Thank you.
I had a question. On some of the sites that you've listed, you've said there is no owner interest, but there is developer interest. So what is the thinking behind that to have those sites included in the housing element?
I think the thinking is we've had developers actively contact us about developing housing on those sites, which would indicate that the owner has reached out to developers or vice versa, and they're interested. That's why we've listed that, so HCD could see that where we have not had a definitive response from an owner, that the sites are being marketed for housing development. I believe we have a few sites in there where that's been the case, where we've had a number of conversations with developers about housing on those sites, but just had not gotten a response from the owners.
Okay, so the assumption is there's been some contact between the owner and the developer.
Correct, and we had been told specifically that in those cases that's what the developer had said. And it's an even stronger indication, I think, that when you have a developer talking about building on the site, that's a little stronger a lot of times than just the owner, who may not really have the potential to develop the housing themselves. So that was something we had shared with HCD. It's listed in the housing element in Appendix B4. So it's clear how we determine that would be a site that's a good candidate for development.
Okay. And my next question is a sort of process question. You've laid out the fact that there'll be zoning changes coming back to the council in the June-July timeframe. The objective standards will be finalized in the fall. What happens between now and the 8 year? I mean, this is a plan. This is a plan in terms of, this is the best information we have as of now. What happens 3 years down the line? Things change. Is there a process for HC? Do we have to do an annual report?
Correct. That's probably the key piece, is we do an annual report that's due every April 1st. And that is increasingly detailed. So it's breaking down projects that are entitled, building permits that have been issued, certificates of occupancy, projects that came in under certain legislation. So it's really tracking what we said we're going to do and then monitoring, are we following through? So yeah, there could be cases where a housing element could need to be modified. For instance, if we were to go below and not have a buffer on lower income categories, we would then need to identify additional sites potentially to show that we could meet that need in that income category. So this has become much more of a living document than something that's done and sits for 8 years, and especially through the annual reporting process. We also have milestones for a lot of our policies and programs, by dates by which they'll be done, or where we will have done assessment to determine if certain things, such as modifications to a fee schedule, need to be done. So yeah, it's a very active thing that will require a lot of tracking, and I'm sure will be reviewed closely by HCD.
Okay, thank you. One last question. In the settlement, the settlement sort of involved a fast track approach to the housing element process, and do the timelines that you've laid out, do they fit in with what HCD is requiring? Because we do have some timeline constraints that we agreed to.
Yeah, essentially once the the stipulated judgment was really to get us into compliance. So once we would have the rezoning in effect and have HCD certified our housing element, that was really as far as the stipulated judgment went. It wouldn't affect future reporting in future years. It was really to get us in compliance with state law. So it put us on a timeline. Essentially, we had a certain amount of days, 45 days, to get revisions to HCD, and they had a certain amount of time to get comments back to us. It accelerated the timeline a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's still,
Yeah, and I guess maybe if I'm missing, the one outstanding thing we have that's in the stipulated judgment is 120 days to complete the rezoning.
okay.
So that's essentially
that's what I was
4
looking
months.
for.
So yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't
Yeah.
guess right where you were going, but yeah, that is
Thank you.
the one outstanding item that we do have a deadline to meet.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Wei, you have 2 minutes.
That's right. Thank you. So right now, because we had 35% buffer without the Fort Valley, we have 28% buffer. Still within what HCD is looking for. If I remember correctly, 2 years ago, Valley Water did show some interest, if I remember correctly. Do you think they have a leadership change, or what's going on there?
I do not know. I know we were very active with getting owner interest, and I do not have a name or a contact. Like, I can't find a letter. Most of our owner interest was submitted online in 2022, so we have a list of people, often with a name. Some people had a lot of detail with what they wanted to do on their sites. Others had very little, but I could not find a reference to that, other than I know that those sites have been on there since very early on.
I actually remember it because the owner of the bowling place actually, I met him by just in the social, he said the Valley Church was interested, so he was interested doing something with them. So I remember there was interest. But anyway, I believe the buffer is there because of, it could be owner change, or things could change. So the better the buffer, I guess, the more we can prove to HCD that these units will be built. Is it any way we can add more sites to satisfy HCDs? To get to reverse this, getting back to 35%, is always too late to do anything?
I don't think we need to do that at this time because we still have a 28% buffer. I mean, it's largely for the market rate housing, but I mean, unless we were directed by HCD to do that, I don't think we need to at this time. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt to identify housing sites, even outside of this process, because HCD is looking for that. So I think the one suggestion of potentially doing an overlay could be something we look at, ways that we can demonstrate that we're looking to actively get housing sites. I do think what that letter proves, though, is the reason you want to have a buffer in the first place.
That's right.
We just sort of got it a little early in the process, but this is exactly why things change. And
Okay, that's where I'm getting, maybe showing HCD we're willing to accommodate further sites if is requested. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Chow, your light is on, but let's come back to you later, since your questions, you did ask questions of the staff.
Mayor,
we will get
about the answers in the staff supplemental report or non-answers. There was no specific answer to any of my questions. I
Okay.
want to make that clear.
Could we address that when we come back to deliberate later in the process? Okay, let's go to public comments now. And Madam City Clerk, how many cards do we have? Just
Yes, Mayor, I have 10 requests to speak in Community Hall, which brings us to 30 minutes there. I see 4 hands raised virtually. Actually 5, so that'll bring us to 45 minutes, approximately.
10 plus 5.
So 10 would be 30 minutes, and then the additional, and I still see there's more hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 21 minutes plus 30 minutes, so 51 minutes. so far?
Okay. Let's do 2 minutes. Let's do 2 minutes per speaker. And we can start with people in the audience.
Okay, very good. So, so just a reminder, anyone wishing to speak on this item, please have your card submitted in the next 9 minutes or your hand raised virtually. So we'll start with John Schwartz, followed by Connie Cunningham, followed by Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, John. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is John Schwartz of JHS Consulting, and I represent the Valley Church on some of their land use matters. Matt McLaughlin, the director, could not be here tonight, so I'm going to speak briefly. I want to thank staff, especially Luke Connolly, Pugh Ghosh, and John Martyr for their efforts to help us resolve this at the 11th hour the other day. We do appreciate that. And I wanted to just touch on a couple of things. You've talked a lot about these parcels, so I don't want to belabor the point tonight. Basically, the church has been on the site since about 1960 and wants to continue the church use on the property. We actually just recorded a shared parking agreement and an access agreement with the county clerk's office that were the last two conditions of approval for some of the tennis court stuff that went on some years ago. So there's part of the disconnect as to why we weren't thinking this was slated for housing in this process. So I know there's been a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion, and again, it's the 11th hour, but we appreciate the flexibility, and I commend you on having a 35% buffer in this process, because in my experience, that's pretty high compared to most cities around here, and that's exactly what it's for. Again, we respectfully request that the city remove those 4 parcels from the list of housing sites, and that you do not rezone the property for residential use. Again, we want to continue the church activities and function on the property. The tennis courts are public. They are open to the residents of Cupertino, and they are a public amenity, and we intend to continue that. That's actually one of the parcels in question here. So with that, I'll stop, and I will be happy to answer any questions if I can. Can't speak too much on behalf of the church on other matters, but happy to address any questions if I can. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And next we have Connie Cunningham, followed by Jennifer Griffin, followed by Dr. Clifton Durbing. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Moen, Vice Mayor Fruin, and council members. I am Connie Cunningham. My pronouns are she and her. I'm from the Housing Commission, but speaking on behalf of myself only. I want to thank you, City Manager Wu, and city staff who have created this housing element. It is an extraordinary achievement. Thank you for the answers that are thorough and on point. In my opinion, this blueprint is for a city I want to live in. Housing for all income levels and abilities, addressing fair housing issues and designing that allows for many types of neighborhoods. I like living in Cupertino now, but I will like it more as it adapts to inviting new neighbors into our community. The changes add an urban feel in some areas while retaining a suburban environment in others. Homeowners who are concerned about the changes will themselves benefit from flexibilities for changing their homes as their families grow and age. Accessory dwelling units can be built by any homeowner. Transitions on corner lots will gently increase the number of homes to allow for missing middle, naturally affordable homes. Taller buildings will be along major street arteries where they should be, near jobs and transit. This housing element outlines the many groups in our city who will benefit from the new ideas, including but not limited to students, workers, seniors, individuals with developmental disabilities, those who have faced discrimination in the past, and unhoused residents. The housing element supports sustainability, for which our city is justifiably proud in its achievements, including the Climate Action Plan 2.0. Building infill homes will save significant energy. Bird Safe and Dark Skies Ordinance not only protects birds, but also saves energy with its new lighting standards. CAP 2.0 includes the idea of a robust tree canopy that includes diversity. A robust canopy will save energy, reducing utility costs, and reduce air pollution, among many other benefits. I will stop here because I will be adding my voice to others who will be speaking.
Thank you,
and
Connie.
So you will
That is
hear
your time.
theirs. Thank you.
Next we have
Bye-bye.
Jennifer Griffin.
Oh, please vote yes.
Jennifer Griffin, followed by Dr. Clifton Durbing, followed by Edward J. Britt. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, City Council. I'm really upset we don't have 3 minutes. We're giving my city away on a dinner plate with a steak knife stuck in its heart. Yes, my church in Los Altos for 50 years has its parking lot on the Los Altos housing element along with 2 other churches, and no one told the ministers. The parking lot at Foothill College is on the housing element for Los Altos Hills. What are we going to do? Eminent domain? At this point, it has been authorized today that there will be an audit of HCD by the state audit department. This was approved this afternoon. I called in and the secretary told me there will be an audit of HCD's handling of certain issues of the housing element. I am very glad about this. I have said again that the RENA numbers are beyond doubt wrong. If HCD knew that they were wrong at the beginning, then there are criminal proceedings. As far as I'm concerned, the 4,500 housing units that are being dumped on Cupertino are completely out of line, and we have no reason to rezone everything. I have graduated from the housing element school from the last 3 years here, and our $2 million spent on this. The staff did the best they could, the consultants did, but it is all in the lap of HCD. I'm not happy about unbundled parking. I really don't like this thing about suddenly that every corner lot in the neighborhood can have a duplex on it. Where the heck did that come from? Nobody's explained why YIMBY law gets to destroy our CEQA, and oh God, great, I've got 1 second. Yeah, stab me through the heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next we have Dr. Clifton Durbing, followed by Edward J. Britt, followed by Yvonne Thorstensen. Welcome, Dr. Durbing.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Mohan, council members, and staff. My name is Clifton Durbing. I'm here to talk as senior warden for the vestry at St. Jude's Episcopal Church here in Cupertino, less than a mile away from here. We wish to express our gratitude to the city for their partnership in including us in the housing element. We hope that the set example for the other houses of worship also look to have their faith into action and to help solve the crisis that we experience with housing. We look forward to continuing our partnership with the city as we move forward toward building homes for our neighbors. And we want to thank you all so much for thinking about the equity among all people, residents here in Cupertino. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Edward J. Britt, followed by Yvonne Thorstensen, followed by Jinpei Liu. Welcome, Edward.
Council, my name is Edward. I go by Ned Britt. I got a little hoarse. Oh, wrong one. All right. My name is Ned Britt, although it's officially Edward J. Britt. We came to Cupertino in 1974. Been here 50 years now. We've watched it migrate into what it is from that time. And I got to tell you, every move that's been done makes it less desirable. But perhaps that is your goal. You can make something affordable if it's undesirable. But if it's desirable, it's going to be expensive. And in particular, I saw an article about building 23 units on Schofield Drive. I don't know whether that is off the table or not. Now, I didn't hear anything about it now. But if you were to actually go through with that project, due to the extreme pedestrian traffic of children at the school when it goes in and out, they're already using crossing guards, and I've seen kids spin to the floor to the ground from running into the sides of cars, not under them, fortunately. If you did that, that would come to what I would call reckless endangerment, and that's a term of art, meaning a choice that is so reckless that it's responsible for mismanagement. So I hope that's off the table. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I noticed is that you're got 30 seconds here. You are trying to charge people now for their parking stickers in the restricted parking area. Is that just to anger people, or is there some real reason for that? You might want to think about that. You're not going to gain any revenue out of that.
Mr. Britt, that item will be heard later this evening for item number 3, so you're free to fill out a speaker card for that item. as well.
I'm finished.
Thank you. Next we have Yvonne Thorstensen, followed by Jinpei Liu, followed by Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Yvonne.
Good evening. I came to Cupertino with my family and 28 years ago, and my kids went through Regnart Elementary School in that very deep single-family zone area that's kind of blank on the housing element. And so I would like to make sure that I say thank you for putting this together. The first time I heard housing element, it was 3.5 years ago, and since then I've learned so many acronyms. But what I really want to put forward is how pleased I am with that we've come to this point in the process, and that we have a plan that will help for the future generations and for the residents who are here during the day, and for those future residents who are my children and the classmates of my children, and the workers and the teachers that are so important for Cupertino as which is one of the things that brought us to this town because of the school district. And so to have the missing middle housing opportunities in low density areas where soft increases in density could allow opportunities for workers and teachers and young people to stay in Cupertino, and would make it better for everyone who lives here now and for all future residents. Thank you so much for all the hard work.
Thank you, Yvonne. Next we have Jinpei Liu, followed by Peggy Griffin, followed by Philip Nguyen. Welcome.
Okay, hi. So good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members, and my name is Jinpei, and I'm a senior who's about to graduate from high school, but unfortunately, after graduating, I won't be able to stay behind, so be my last, before I have to go, I would just like to say what I have to say today. So today, I'm here to stress the importance of adopting the resolution as it is in its current form to adapt to the general plan amendments. So in the plan, which includes a housing element, includes strategy that will be crucial to making our city more inclusive, accessible to people of all backgrounds, as mentioned before, like people with disabilities, youth, workers, and so in the midst of an ongoing housing crisis. So some things I like in there is mixed-use projects supporting affordable housing development, tenant protections, sustainability, and especially encouraging missing middle housing developments, which will allow historically exclusive neighborhoods become more diverse and inclusive while increasing the amount of housing which we need in this time. So any attempts to delay or dilute and any changes should serve to make the element more ambitious and to serve to correct any minor mistakes. So what I have to say is this entire council needs to be unified in support and show unified front in voting on this issue. We know approval is a necessary step in doing our part to solve the crisis. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jinpei. Next we have Peggy Griffin, followed by Philip Nguyen, followed by Jean Bedord. Welcome, Peggy.
Hi, I'd like to use the slide.
The overhead should work. Just place it. There you go.
Good evening, council members, staff. At the last Planning Commission meeting, Commissioner Lindskog asked Assistant Director Conley, "We can't make changes to the housing element, but it doesn't apply to does it apply to the mobility and land use element?" He replied, "It would not apply to those to the same degree." So with that in mind, please consider making changes to the aspects of the mobility and land use elements. When you look at what was reviewed by HCD, this is what they did. There's no mobility, no land use. This is the document they reviewed. VMT mitigation banking. It's basically transportation.
Order. Can the I can't see this in Zoom.
Stop me. Pardon me?
I can't see the slides in Zoom. Is it because I usually like to take screenshot, but the Zoom? Oh, now I see it. Okay.
Can I
Please go
start?
ahead. Please
Can I
go
start
ahead.
again? Okay. The VMT mitigation banking, transportation mitigation fees will be replaced with a banking fee. This is a big pot containing all VMT money from all projects. It will no longer have to fix problems caused by a specific project. Instead, it can be used clear across town. Mobility, unbundling parking. That means apartments and offices charge extra for parking. Apartment residents park on neighboring streets instead. Local neighborhoods forced to get parking permit. Parking costs move from developers to the nearby residents. Enforcement becomes an issue. You need full-time parking enforcement staff. Citywide VMT reduction, implementing market pricing for parking means no free parking in Cupertino. Meters, impacts to dwindling retail. Local neighborhoods forced to get parking permits again, which you're going to charge in the next item. Enforcement becomes an issue, need full-time enforcement staff, costs more for residents. Please consider making some changes to the mobility. These are not directly, they have to be conforming, but you can modify
Thank you, Peggy.
it.
That is your time.
Thank you.
Next we have Philip Nguyen, followed by Jean Bedord, followed by Rhoda Fry. Welcome, Philip.
Hello, Mayor, council members, and staff. I'm Philip, and I'm a community member of Cupertino. My comment is a celebration as well as a note for the importance of the entire City Council to show like a unified support for approving this final draft of the housing element, which will be a massive boon to Cupertino's future in addressing our schools' falling enrollments and population, as well as addressing the climate crisis on a municipal level. We should also acknowledge the long and thorough process of community engagement over the last few years and of the massive effort and work that the city staff have invested in this final draft. So please do the right thing and approve the final draft of the housing element for your current and future residents of Cupertino. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Next we have Jean Bedord, followed by Rhoda Fry, followed by Luis Sedati. Welcome, Jean.
Good evening, Mayor Mohan, Vice Mayor Fruin, council members, and staff. My name is Jean Bedord, and I'm a Cupertino resident. I'm here to commend the staff and City Council for their hard work in producing and getting HCD's approval of the city's sixth cycle housing element. I'm here to urge this council to unanimously approve this document. It's been a long journey, 3 years. There have been a lot of opportunities for community engagement, and I've managed to attend most of the public meetings and provide input to the process. This document is not perfect, but most importantly, it's good enough to satisfy HCD and bring Cupertino into compliance with state housing laws. It's critical to have the entire council solidly behind this document to demonstrate to HCD that the city is committed to housing. This is not the time to abstain from voting. This is not the time to raise frivolous objections. This is a living document. Some property owners will change their minds, and that's to be expected. Others won't build because of finances or other circumstances. Our city staff and consultants have planned for contingencies by building in a buffer and developing policy changes to gently densify the over 90% of Cupertino that is single-family residences. Again, I urge this council to unanimously approve the recommended action. Then as a city, we can move ahead with actually producing badly needed housing. Thank you for your effort and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Jean. Next we have Rhoda Fry, followed by Luis Sedati. Welcome, Rhoda.
Hi, I'd like to echo some of the comments made by Jennifer Griffin, Peggy Griffin, and Ned Britt. You know, I was 6 years, for the first 6 years that I lived in Cupertino, I rented. And then with my husband, we had two incomes. We bought a 1-bedroom, 1-closet, 1-bathroom, 800 square foot home. And if you walked in the bathroom with heels, you would sink through the floor. After the earthquake, all the single pane windows were broken. So we made sacrifices to live here, and it's expensive. Anyway, please answer questions asked by council members to their full satisfaction. To my knowledge, there's been no public engagement on the city's new housing policies. I'm very concerned about disclosure. Also echoing the concerns brought up during the Planning Commission by the planning commissioners regarding public engagement. We do need to retain a park space. And most importantly, I hope that when the state comes through with their HCD, if our RENA numbers do actually go down, I'm hoping that we will have the right to modify the housing element and modify zoning accordingly. I understand that once we upzone, right now by law, we can't downzone. But if our RENA numbers change, I would expect that we will have that as an option. So please discuss that tonight as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhoda. And our last speaker in Community Hall is Louise Sadati. Welcome, Louise.
Good evening. Thank you to the city staff, the council, and residents for all their work that made our present progress to actually have a housing element approved by HCD to be presented tonight for approval by City Council. There will always be upset and some disagreement with any change. There's an adage that the only things that cannot be prevented is tax, death, and I would like to add change. Change is inevitable. The housing element will bring many advantages and flexibility to Cupertino. The housing element will bring progress towards the future. This will help bring more students into our school districts and help keep our schools open. The mobility element is necessary to be proactive and handle transportation in preventing gridlock in transportation. The responsible vote is to approve the housing element adoption. Failure to do so would leave the city exposed to the builder's remedy and place the city in legal jeopardy. The Walk by Cupertino, Cupertino for All, and residents support the housing element and mobility element. Thank you for all that you do to make the city progress and not try to pretend that it's frozen in 1970. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. And there are 6 individuals requesting to speak virtually. We'll start with Jennifer Sharon, followed by David Fung, followed by Neil Park McClintock. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor Mohan, City Council members, and City staff. I am speaking on behalf of Walk by Cupertino tonight, an organization of over 2,500 residents who care about making walking and biking safer and easier. I'm excited to see that the adoption of the Cupertino housing element is finally up for approval. This has been a long process, and it's wonderful to see a plan which will create homes of all sizes, types, and income levels to meet the housing needs of our entire community. First, staff has made some excellent recommendations in the mobility elements of the housing element that should be approved without changes. These are necessary to meet the goals of the housing element while mitigating the potential negative impact of more cars on our road. We need to plan now for what changes the new housing will bring and not just kick the can down the road on traffic increases and complain later. These edits include market pricing for parking spaces in the city. This will encourage more people to use active transportation and transit and allow people to only buy the parking that they need. We need to do this as a city to meet our climate action goals and avoid heading into traffic gridlock. Approving the mobility banking, fee banking is also a good idea, as it will increase flexibility in spending in our city. Walk by Cupertino asks you to approve these mobility element changes tonight as part of the plan without watering them down. They are necessary and useful elements to the housing element plan. We've finally reached the time to approve the housing element that HCD has blessed and end the creation process. Let's move forward. We can do this with your support and approval. I urge you to do so. Thank you for considering my input tonight and your work on behalf of Cupertino.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next we have David Fung, followed by Neil Park McClintock, followed by San R. Welcome, David.
Hello, Mayor Mohan, Vice Mayor Fruin, and the entire council. My name is David Fung. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission, and I'm here to speak to you tonight to answer any questions you may have about the Planning Commission recommendation, which is part of the packet. I'm not present in the hall. Vice Chair Linskog is present, though, and can answer on behalf of the commission. The Planning Commission reviewed the housing element draft on April 29th, largely in the form that you see it tonight, and returned a 3-2 recommendation that you adopt this draft as submitted. We performed a review in compliance with our charter and had a vigorous discussion on a number of topics, including site selection, clarification of new residential zoning definitions, new residential densities, ADU policies, corner lot changes, the result, the impact of the environmental assessment settlement, projects like the Hamptons that were not included in the RENA response, changes to the parkland dedication policy, and related changes that were out of the direct scope of the housing element. We had a thorough discussion about the impacts, including builder's remedy projects on Cupertino, should we find that further modifications to this draft were required. The housing element is always an enormous and far-reaching document, but much more so in this cycle because of the large increase in RENA target. Whether you agree or disagree with the recommended changes, an important benefit of the Planning Commission hearing was that it provided a first opportunity for the public to see the proposed draft, which is largely in the same form you see tonight. Although 2 weeks of time may not be enough time to review every aspect of the document, it is a notable improvement over just 3 days of public notice, including the opportunity to analyze the content and reach out to the city staff prior to tonight's hearing. Finally, I'd like to thank the entire planning staff for their extraordinary work on the proposal before you today. We've always found the team to be responsive to our policy questions and also to our requests for improvements that help the public understand the focus of new changes, as well as making the historical development visible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Next we have Neil Park McClintock, followed by San R, followed by Gauri Chawla. Welcome, Neil.
Hello, my name is Neil, and I'm the current president of Cupertino for All, and grew up in Cupertino. I went through CUSD, FUHSD, and FHDA, and I've held multiple jobs in the city as well. And as such, care a lot about the future of this community. And that's why I'm proud to join all the speakers tonight to ask for approval of this final draft of the housing element, and want to firmly state also my opinion that no changes should be made except to make this document even more ambitious. I'll be reading parts of an official letter that we submitted tonight as a steering committee, but I also want to support the accompanied staff recommendations for the mobility element, recognizing that our growth should go hand in hand with making our city far less car dependent, which in turn will make us much more sustainable and also a much happier community too. Regarding the housing element tonight, our organization welcomes the great level of detail in comparison to previous drafts, the commitment to rezoning, and the incorporation of public commentary found in recent revisions as well. We believe that this is truly a community housing element that was put together from years and years of public input. In particular, we want to name a few things that we absolutely think are game changers for the city and should not be touched. First, the missing middle strategies. We recognize that a lot of newer mid to high density homes on Stevens Creek and other corridors will be subsidized and income restricted or higher range market rate. Therefore, it's important for us to have a wide array of different types of homes, which can be ensured through the missing middle strategy piece. As well, commitment to and deadline for rezoning for areas of higher density, the site inventory, the policy goals and language found throughout the document that's associated with it, as well as community requested policies such as the reduction of parking requirements, universal design standards, local school and college strategies and policies, which were included as well.
Thank you, Neil. That is your time. And we have 3 additional hands raised that were raised before the cutoff. San R, Gauri Chawla, and Debbie Timmers. Welcome, San.
Good evening, Mayor Sheila and City Council. I would like to request that you please revisit the mobility element. The mobility element is not a core part of the housing element draft, and it should be treated separately without the same constraints that the housing element draft itself imposes on your decisions tonight. Specifically, I would like to ask you to remove clauses in the mobility element that talk about charging for parking in various places in the city. I would like to see removal of the desire to reduce and eliminate parking in the city, making parking an upsell by decoupling it from the cost of housing itself. That would make a big impact to the quality of our streets and making sure that our streets don't get overly crowded with parking that really should belong on these housing units. And I would also like to ask you to explore what can be done to avoid the change in the character of the city through the redefinition of allowed housing R2 type on R1 corner lots. That will completely change the landscape of our city today. Finally, I also want to say, as you're looking at some of these changes with the Valley Church, I fully support the retention of Valley Church as it is. It is an important landmark in the city. The tennis courts are highly utilized, and I don't understand the city's desire to go after our sports facilities. We have seen a continual onslaught on our sports facilities. First it was the golf course, then it was the Cupertino Sports Center, and now it is Valley Church and its tennis courts. So please leave the Valley Church alone. And if you have to go after other housing element sites, I don't understand why the Dish and Dash was omitted. Perhaps you should go after the Dish and Dash and also look at other housing element sites on De Anza, which is actually the best suited because of its proximity to transit and also its ease of access in and out of that corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, San. So we actually have three speakers, Gori Chawla, Debbie Timmers, and Glenn Fischler, who had raised your hand and lowered your hand before the cutoff, but I see you're back, so I will call on you. So welcome, Gori.
Good evening, Council. My name is Gori, and I am a student and resident of Cupertino. I am going to graduate from Cupertino High School this year. I want to emphasize a couple of things regarding the approval of our sixth cycle housing element. First, I want to start by echoing the calls for unified support and thank staff for their work putting together tonight's report. It is important that our council does not abstain or vote no. Approval on this housing element is necessary for our community to move forward. I also want to highlight the importance of preserving language in this housing element. A representative from HCD has stated that changes should only make the housing element more ambitious, meaning we should not try to cut off or limit the housing element as it is currently. An important highlight I would like to specifically make is for the Missing Middle program, which will open up historically exclusive neighborhoods to a diverse range of residents. This will enhance our community strength through diversity. No effort should be made to dilute programs like this, which are necessary to create homes of all sizes, types, and income levels to meet the housing needs of our entire community. I also want to uplift the mobility element, which has been recommended by the staff and which will encourage greater use of active transportation and transit, which will only serve to uplift our community. This housing element is a solution to declining enrollment. Many people within our community are concerned about school closures. However, passing this ambitious housing element with no changes is the best move to bring in young families. They will finally have a place that they can afford to make their livelihood in. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Gori. Next we have Debbie Timmers, followed by Glenn Fischler. Welcome, Debbie. And Debbie, I see you've unmuted yourself. You should be able to. You're unmuted now, so you should be able to speak. Maybe having some audio issues. So I will skip to Glenn Fischler, and I will come back to you, Debbie. Welcome, Glenn.
Good evening, Mayor Mohan, City Council, and staff. I'm Glenn Fischler, a Cupertino resident for over 25 years. Let me start by saying I was excited last month to read the headline in the San Jose Mercury News, Cupertino hits home run with housing element. Fast forward to today. After thinking about the city's 3+ year housing element journey, reading over tonight's meeting materials and listening to tonight's staff presentation, I'd like to express my thanks and congratulations to the City Council and staff for your leadership in getting the city's housing element approved by HCD. That's a big accomplishment. Now it's time for our City Council to take the appropriate next steps in this process. So in closing, I'd like to encourage unanimous City Council approval of staff's recommended resolution for the city's housing element. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Glenn. And I will return to Debbie. And I'm allowing you to talk. So you've unmuted yourself. So, well, Mayor, I believe this person is having some audio issues and is unable to comment. So we will unfortunately need to close it out. Yes?
Okay. All right. Let's close the public comments section of the meeting. Do we want to take a 5-minute break before we do the deliberations? Let's do that. It is 8:27. Let's come back at 8:35. Thank you. 8:35, and we are ready to continue with the proceedings. We were done with the public comment section, and now we are bringing the issue back to council. And I am hoping for a motion. Council Member Wei.
I like to, for discussion purpose, to make a motion to recommend to adopt the recommended action by the staff, but without the 4 Valley Church parcels.
Okay. Is there a second to Councilmember Wei's motion?
Second.
All right. Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and if there are discussions, let's go ahead with the discussions. 5 minutes per council member. Councilmember Wei, your light is still on.
Okay, I'll start a discussion then. I made a motion because I do believe that, like a lot of comments from the public, this is a document that has HCD's blessing. Even without the 4 Valley Church parcels, we still have 28% buffer. And according to what I heard from staff, this is the working document. It's a living working document. So with 1 year coming back, we're going to do the assessment, see how we're doing, might be able to add more sites then. And I'm very pleased that even with Westport and Marina Food, even though they're not in the housing element, once they're built, they will be counted toward our housing units. So I want to thank, I don't think I ever said my thank you to the staff for all your hard work and for our consultant. And I really believe that we did a lot of outreach in the beginning of the housing process. So the staff have and consultant have a lot to work with. And I also want to thank City Manager Wolf, make this a priority. And to pass this, really, I think one comment from, I think he left, about the Schofield with 23 units. That is if I understood, it's a preliminary builder's remedy project. And so in order for that not to happen, we don't know if that's gonna happen. Hopefully that's not gonna happen. In order for no remedies, builder's remedy to come to us again, we need to approve the housing element. Is that a correct statement?
Sorry about the microphone trouble. Yes, that is correct. The reason we're getting preliminary applications, and that is preliminary, it's not a formal application, is because we have a non-compliant housing element right now. So we do not really have any ability to prevent applications like that are not consistent with any of our zoning or general plan standards, because our housing element is non-compliant.
Okay, thank you. So it's more important to us to approve it tonight. Thank you. So I have 2 minutes left.
Councilmember Chow, 5 minutes, please.
I still have more questions, so I will go to my questions. Here's my slide. This was submitted to staff but not answered. So in figure LU2, there were some, I think many sites that's in heart of the city do not have the height or density limiting marked in LU2. But I understand the state law, if we don't specify the limit in general plan, the limit in other plan may not apply. So could the staff answer this question?
Sure.
Is the height or density specified somewhere in general plan?
Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, if you scrolled further right on this map in the document, the maximum heights and densities are listed there for the lighter green
For the
properties.
lighter green,
Yes.
they are listed. Okay, that's good to know. And then in the same figure, there is a mark that this building plan that used to apply everywhere in Cupertino says do not apply to housing element sites identified. But some of the sites are low or medium density. I understand we may not want to apply a slope of 1:1 to high density. Shouldn't we still apply that for low and medium density site?
So the setbacks would stand for those, and as a result,
Yeah.
you would have the setbacks would be what would determine where that building would sit.
But the slope would not apply?
No.
So why do we need to waive the slope for low, medium density site?
That is our recommendation, to
Okay.
make it less difficult for housing to be built.
And we also have very few low-density sites in the housing element. I
But
believe there's only
most of the sites that currently already are zoned like 25 units per acre, and this 1:1 slope apply. So for some of these lower density sites, that's 25 units per acre. It seems they could still apply. Anyway, I don't have a lot of time. So another thing is this part strategy is removed from the general plan. We used to require compatibility with neighborhood and surrounding area. Why couldn't we limit this only to housing element sites? My concern is there are sites that's not in the housing element, but could be proposed. And today they are required to be compatible with the surrounding area. With this, they don't need to be compatible any site. Could we limit this only so that it's not removed, but we make exception for housing element sites? So that's possible, right?
So I would recommend addressing these concerns through objective standards that are actually enforceable. This particular standard is not really doing much for the vast majority of projects that the city would see. It's not it's objective
Okay.
and
So
wouldn't be enforceable.
Next one, this is the policy from the mobility element. So I understand that we have a new state law that require VMT as a measurement. We want to reduce it, but some of the things in the bullet point are policies that's never discussed. Can we remove these more controversial and unclear items? Because it does say that may include and not limited to. So why don't we remove the ones that might raise questions with Cupertino residents? For example, discourage single-family occupancy vehicle and bundled parking cost, because that means extra burden for tenants, and implementing market rate pricing that hurt retail, and lower our sales tax, and limiting parking supply might result in more circling to find parking. It may or may not even reduce VMT. So is it possible that we have this policy but remove some bullet points?
I think the way the policy was written is that it does say include but not limited to. You have a choice of things to select from. There's nothing that's actually mandated there. And a lot of the things like discouraging single occupancy vehicle travel, there's already policies that are widely doing that related to either climate action, greenhouse gas reduction, to try to reduce auto trips as a whole.
Yeah, but California law already is going to require all zero emission vehicle by 2035. A lot of these arguments do not even apply. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Who goes next? Any other comments by council members? Let me jump in. I think this document is, it's this whole housing element process has been many years in the making. So I commend staff, city manager, and everyone involved with the housing element to get it to where it is now. As I look through the document, I see that the housing has been distributed all over the city. There's a good balance between residential and mixed use. The objective standards we've already heard will come back to us in the fall. The AFFH, which was the most confusing for me when I started reading this at the beginning, and I think in the first, maybe even the second draft, HCD pointed out that we were deficient in those two areas, in that area. And that has been corrected, and at least in my mind, that wasn't easy to do. But the fact that we support teacher housing, that we support ADUs, the missing middle, which is not as unusual as we think it is. Our policy already included 3 ADUs and a single-family home. So 4 units have already been approved. So this is a variation of that. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct. You'd recently modified the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, so 4 units are already allowed on R1 zone properties, and R2 for that matter.
Right. And I also know that you accommodated HCD by going with R2 zoning and looked at the community interest. You could have gone from R3 to and you did not. You stayed with R2, and I think so. That was, I think, a big step in your thinking of zoning. And you've done some things. You've dropped the addition dash site because there was no realistic way that they would develop into residential sites. So I think this housing element document, it may not be perfect, but it considers everything that we would want to see in a plan for the next 8 years, with the assumption that things are going to change. I think someone mentioned it. This is not a static document. Things are going to be changing. The economy changes, or owners' interest change, developers' situation changes. So keeping in mind that there are many opportunities down the line to make adjustments, this is a pretty good housing element plan, and I fully support it. Thank you. Council Member Chow, you're out of time. If I
have more questions.
Hang on just one
if
second.
you can, we can
Councilmember
more
Moore,
time.
did you have any comments? Just 1 second. Go ahead. Yeah.
Pardon, what is the process here? Are we
The
only
process is you get 5 minutes to...
And that's it? One
Yes.
round of 5 minutes and then we're done?
Yes.
Okay, so sure, I'll speak now. First, congratulations for all of your work to bring the housing element close to certification. Prior to coming to the Planning Commission a couple of weeks ago, there were no public hearings since July. I have studied the housing element and written an extensive document on it, and read the UC Davis Law Review study called The Uneventful History of Government Code Section 65759, published January of 2024, regarding the applicability of Government Code 65759 to zoning, which is debatable. Tearing off an environmental assessment, which is not a CEQA document, is also debatable and could potentially be subject to litigation. Using the categorical exemption of infill development, which is expected for multiple projects, which is assumed to be what will happen for housing element sites included in this housing element, seems questionable without an EIR. The sheer number of infill projects might be a project in their own right, subject to CEQA. I'd like to know the answer to that. We do not have a complete statement of the environmental impacts, which will have significant and unavoidable impacts with mitigation for air quality, greenhouse gases, which negatively impacts climate change, which we are all concerned about, transportation and noise, even when ignoring the cumulative environmental impacts to the region. We cannot question the environmental assessment. It is not a CEQA document. We have no opportunity to have answers to questions or to errors or omissions, and we have no statement of overriding considerations which would inform the public. The California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, has the environmental impact report as its heart, and the lawsuit against the city took that heart, that public engagement, that disclosure of impacts to our regional health and safety away. My greatest concern is that this approach will not result in an attainable solution to the housing affordability problem. While there are a number of longstanding inclusionary policies in the housing element, I believe we have a council majority and other forces strongly nudging us to rubber stamp this housing element. A solution to a problem as complicated as this one requires that we delve into the details, and I do not see a willingness among my council colleagues or HCD to undertake that work. At such time that these rubber stamping positions change and we are willing to examine the details and challenge easy but ultimately futile assumptions, I will nonetheless be ready to engage in the work that is needed to solve the complicated problems that are in front of us. Thank you.
Councilmember Chow. Let me go to Vice Mayor Fruin. 5 minutes, please, Vice Mayor.
So I'm not going to engage in an overlong speech. I want to thank staff for all of the incredible work that you've done in this. There was a long way to go. The initial draft left a lot to be desired in my mind, especially as somebody who advocated on the other side of this dais before coming here. I also want to thank the advocates who've continued to remain engaged, no matter how you felt about this process, because frankly, your voices matter. We all want to shape the city that we live in. We want to feel good about the place that we are. And frankly, if we don't support this tonight, if we don't move forward, then the types of projects that people have expressed concerns about, like the project on Schofield, will continue to plague us. Right? If we want to see development that we shape, then we have to have a plan in place that does it. And as long as we remain non-compliant, then we will see more Schofields. A vote against this plan is a vote for more Schofields. And then I want to thank my council colleagues for engaging with the process themselves. This is not an easy one. There is so much that is different this time compared to previous cycles, so it's not like you can just go back and look at what was done in 2014 or any other previous term and say, oh, we're going to do that. No, it doesn't work. So thank you so much for your work here in the past months and tonight. And I will reserve the rest of my time. 3:30.
Councilmember Chow, you actually run out.
No, I run out of time, so could
you
we
have run out of time,
allocate more time since this is a very important topic?
Okay, hang on for 1 second. Let's go to Councilmember Wei, who still has some time left.
Just 2 minutes.
And we'll come back to you.
So what I would like to further to clarify is Councilmember Chow's question, and the public have, saying that they don't want this, they don't want that, they need that to be more discussion. But what I heard from staff is things in there are not mandated. They are flexible. They are options that can be done or can. So it's not a mandate that you have to do certain things.
Yes, correct. Related to the VMT and the transportation policies, most of them offer a menu of things you select from. There's not any one thing that is mandated. And some of the other language about things such as unbundling parking are related to state laws. that are in effect, and the language in the plan references that to comply to the extent that state law requires. It's not going beyond that, but again, these are things that are out there, and our policies should reflect that that's the direction state law is going.
Thank you. So like Vice Mayor Frun, I like to make a few statements about this housing element. I don't believe anybody's rubber stamping anything. There are so many questions. Yes, it is a complicated document, but our staff and our consultant have done extensive work on this, and we all have read it. And again, many people said this is not a perfect document, and I'm going to say, yes, it is not a perfect document, but it is a living document, and it also, we need to face reality. There are consequences if we do not have a certified housing element. We're going to have more builder's remedy. Is that what our residents want to see? And I think if we don't do it, if builder's remedy come more, I think the council will be blamed. You could have a chance to have a certified housing element. Why don't you do it? So I don't believe anybody's rubber stamping this document. Yes, we all have questions. We all want to ask more questions, but I want to believe that our staff and our consultant have done a yeoman's job to make sure the document complies to current changing laws. There are so many laws that's changed that's built into this document, and also to have a frank conversation with HCD and to show that Cupertino is willing to move forward and is willing to open our doors to new residents and in a reasonable, rational way. And I do believe that we are not rubber stamping anything. We're going to continue to ask questions. We're going to continue to morph this and really work on this. So I am advocating for my council members to really ask questions, yes, but really be realistic and be a partner with our residents to make sure that we have a certified housing element so we don't face remedies like builder's remedy. Thank you.
Councilmember Fruin, you still have some time left. 2 minutes.
Thanks. So just to reiterate the fact that there is no rubber stamping occurring here, I've had plenty of conversations with staff about the housing element multiple times over the course of the last several months, and frankly, since the time that I came into office. I've set my own meetings with HCD to ensure that I understood what we needed to do. There's certainly no rubber stamping here. We had an opportunity in July to give direction to staff. We did. That was the time to make a statement. That was the time to give direction. And, we can either come prepared to these meetings and make that direction, or we can hang off on the sidelines.
Councilmember Chow, you're out of time, but I will give you 2 minutes. And with the understanding that if anyone else needs 2 minutes, we'll give that to you as well.
But so what policy do we have to preserve at-risk BMR unit?
There is a policy in the housing element. I forget the number of it right now, but it's encouraging more outreach with the operators of people that have BMR units that are going to be expiring.
It's still pretty weak, right? That's
well, and
okay,
we're making sure noticing requirement.
I thank you for reminding us that there was council direction to disperse the housing element sites across the city, especially in areas with declining school enrollment. I remember the council had direction to consider sites at Bob Road, and since we also included half a dozen sites without owner interest, and that location is ideal for De Anza students and staff. So I wonder how come none of the sites from that area were considered.
The Bub Road sites were what were listed as Tier 2 sites in 2022, so they were never really priority sites. They were viewed as backups in case they were going to be needed. Several of the sites, I believe we had some environmental issues, and a lot of them also had long-term leases that were not likely to expire. And based on that, they were not seen as sites that were going to redevelop by 2031.
Okay. So
we've also never had any inquiries really about housing development over there.
But we did include other sites without any interest. And why do we have to double the density on most sites or even more? because my understanding is developers actually told us that higher density projects doesn't pencil out in Cupertino. They prefer low and medium density project. We double the current maximum density as the minimum density. That would mean next cycle, if they are not developed, we cannot count them. But if we upzone, for example, 25 units to 35 units per acre to this time, if it's not developed, next time we can upzone to 45 units. So gradually we upzone, we can consider those units again in the next housing element when we upzone again. So why don't we do this gradual upzoning?
I think the size of our arena number kind of dictated what the density needed to be. In order to meet the arena, if we had lower density, we'd probably need well over 100 sites in order to do that. So given the location along the major corridors, the densities we have make sense. I think that's demonstrated by the fact that HCD gave us the letter they did. They were supportive of the density at that range. So it's difficult to meet arena and a buffer if we don't have densities
thank you.
in the range we do.
I'm out of time, yeah.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Fruin, 2 minutes.
Yeah, there's also, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that, you know, there's a statutory safe harbor for, at least for sites like those in Cupertino, for densities at 50 units, for 50 dwelling units per acre. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Yeah, so basically we need to be zoning at that density in order to be able to count some of these sites to begin with.
Correct.
All right, okay, so that's a good partial explanation for why those densities need to be what they are, beyond just the economics of the issue. You know, just add in addition, this is not the end of the road. We have a lot of work to do on implementation after this point in time. So if you've been engaged through now, stay engaged. And if you felt like your voice wasn't heard, then this is the time to remain with us and talking to us.
If I could just add one other thing too on the comment about like townhome densities in the 20 to 35 range. That's true.
Please.
We very commonly get questions about that. The sites we're looking to rezone as priority housing sites aren't the only residential sites. So Stevens Creek, De Anza Boulevard are loaded with properties that already have residential designations in that density range for townhomes. So we're trying to get a demand that really doesn't exist so much as what we know will happen anyway naturally. So that's another thought behind the densities and the sites we chose.
Great, I really appreciate the context. Thank you so much. 30 seconds.
Okay, so we have a motion. We have a second, and seeing no other lights for discussion. Councilmember Wei, you have your light on.
Oh, I think I do have 2 minutes. I do want to ask.
You do have 2 minutes,
right?
yeah. You do.
I want to follow up with Vice Mayor Fruin's first question about the overlay. Is it a possibility we want to build into our motion, or you don't recommend it? I have high respect for our staff's expertise. Really, a lot of these questions that we ask, I think we should really have asked ahead of time, because your answer really answers our questions, and we did try to do that. So, is that overlay option, would it be beneficial for us, or what do you think about it?
I think looking into it and considering it, I just don't have enough detail now to commit to doing it tonight. I would say no, because we need to see how that would work. I think we would want to have a conversation with HCD and our consultant just to make sure. So something that would be definite in the motion, I think, would be problematic right now versus exploring it, because there are cities that do that option. It's just that we don't have any reference right now in our housing element to using overlays.
So it is something that you can keep in mind if
yes, absolutely.
and do some more research, and maybe if HCD has issues with us taking from 35% to 28%, maybe that could be a option that you can work with HCD. Okay, thank you very much.
I had a question for maybe City Manager Wu and staff. We are asked to adopt this resolution adopting general plan amendments. So it's really the housing element that we are approving, and these other the mobility element, for example, the land use and community character, we're not making any changes, right? All we are doing is aligning them with the state requirement or updating them.
So-
we are
so-
not. Are we making any substantive changes to these other elements of the general plan?
A great question. So part of the kind of planning 101, general plan has many elements, including your land use element, housing element, mobility element, safety element, and it goes on. So we're rewriting the housing element for the next 8-year cycle. By doing so, we're also realigning the housing element with other consistent chapters and other elements, for instance, mobility element, safety element, and others, so that there is a consistency through our general plan. To answer your question, there's no substantive changes to other elements other to have that consistency throughout our document.
Okay, so it's just an update and then a realignment.
No, I would also add that because there was an environmental assessment done and there were new impacts that were not studied in the prior environmental impact report for the prior housing element update, there are changes that environmental assessment would be incorporated into the adopted housing element as Appendix G. So there are some changes to the other elements that need to be done to make sure that those elements are consistent with the proposed policies in the environmental assessment.
That have already been approved.
No, council will be approving those tonight if it approves the staff recommendation.
Okay. Okay, I have no other questions. We have a motion. We have a second. Seeing no other questions, let's vote by lights, please.
Mayor. So I will be abstaining, but I have a statement. So can I?
Mayor, is Councilmember Chow recognized to speak?
Oh, Mayor. So is it possible to provide my reasons for abstaining for the meeting record?
Let's vote, and then maybe you can state your reasons.
Okay.
Let's do that. Let's vote by lights, please.
The motion carries with Chow abstaining and Moore voting no.
Okay, so Councilmember Chow, go ahead and state your reasons.
I'd like to request that my reasons for abstaining to be included in the meeting minutes. So there have been no substantive deliberation in public meetings on the proposed policies and proposed densities of the housing element since August 2022, when the City Council first considered the site inventory. There are new, never mentioned in previous drafts, never discussed in public citywide policies proposed for the mobility element, which will impact every resident on their daily travel needs. Many of my questions submitted for May 7th study session were still not answered. They were still not answered in today's supplemental report. More questions were submitted by the deadline of Monday 10 a.m. and none of the questions were answered, not even one. And I was not able to get through many of my questions today on the dais given the time limit. The housing element process has gone off the rail as a behind the back of the City Council and the public process. The growth rate of this housing element would be 35% over 8 years, which is 3.5 times of the normal growth rate of 1%. The environmental assessment did not provide real assessment of the impact, as many of the rationales given were simply copied from the 2014 EIR. I appreciate the work to have a compliant housing element, which is important. I support some of the policies proposed, such as the allowing triplex or quadplex on R2 sites for missing middle, but I simply cannot support the undemocratic and non-transparent process since August 2022. In good conscience and to serve the residents to the best of my ability, I simply cannot support the adoption of these documents on the agenda today. But recognizing the importance of having a compliant housing element, I'm abstaining from this vote today.
Thank you, Councilmember Chow. Okay. We are done with the discussion for item number 1, which is the 6th cycle housing element. Should we take a 5-minute break? No need? No need of a break? Okay, no, I didn't know. I just wanted to make sure you guys were comfortable. All right, let's move on to item number 2, which is the fiscal year 24-25 fee schedule. And we will wait for staff to settle down before we go ahead with the staff report. Maybe City Manager, you could start.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Mohan. As staff is getting ready to upload the presentation, and thank you, Council, for taking the time to consider the fee increase. As Council, remember that we have brought a study session to Council on this topic to review the study that has been done by Consultant Matrix, and also to review the potential adoption of a cost recovery policy. So what's before you today are 2 actions. One is to align our fee schedule to recover some of the costs for the services that we're rendering for the residents. In addition to adopt the policy, this will be a brand new policy for Council to consider. If the both are adopted today, we're aiming at about mid-July for the effective date of the new fees to be published. Thank you, and go ahead, and Jonathan will take you through the presentation.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. Tonight we'll be presenting the proposed fiscal year 24-25 fee schedule update and cost recovery policy. On the agenda, we'll be providing some background, including defining a fee, recent fee studies, and the 5 fee schedules, followed by new fees and changes, their fiscal impact, the user fee cost recovery policy, and lastly, the staff recommendation. As defined in the 2023 fee study, a user fee is a charge for a service provided by a governmental agency to a public citizen or group for private benefit, and the amount may not exceed the estimated reasonable cost of providing the service. As you may recall, the staff presented the 2023 fee study in the meeting of February 6th, and with the previous study being conducted in 2016. In short, the fee study process begins with a cost allocation plan, which calculates and applies indirect cost to direct cost to calculate a fully burdened hourly rate for staff. These rates are then used by the fee study to calculate the full cost to provide a specific service, setting a ceiling for that specific service. During the February meeting, Council directed staff to propose fee schedule near full cost recovery, with the exception for appeals, fees that would encourage compliance, and other fees that would promote greenhouse gas improvement. Staff was also directed to incorporate a phase-in period for fees that would have a greater year-over-year change or increase. In general, the proposed fees were calculated by applying the CPI, or Consumer Price Index, a Construction Cost Index, or CCI, or a change in estimated labor costs for to the fiscal year 23-24 full cost recovery rate provided by the fee study. The city has 5 fee schedules, of which only schedules A through D will be included in tonight's proposed fee update. Schedule A, general fees, includes fees not specific to a department or division that would require a dedicated schedule, such as code enforcement permits, false alarms, and city clerk services. Schedule B, engineer fees, covers fees necessary for the engineering division in the Public Works Department to review plans and applications for private development, which includes design and inspections. Schedule C, planning fees, is utilized by the Planning Division, which administers all required review and evaluation processes for the proposed land use projects and maintains the goals and objectives of the city's general plan and zoning ordinances. Schedule D, building fees, is utilized by the building division and covers general building, construction plan check, and building code enforcement. And lastly, Schedule E, Parks and Recreation Fees, is utilized by the Recreation Service Department, which organizes markets and oversees recreation and leisure services in a variety of programs. Per resolution number 04-35, Parks and Rec fees would be administratively updated as needed based off of the market. Now moving on to new fees and noteworthy changes. New fees proposed in this schedule include a credit card transaction fee, which is applied to 3.4 of the transaction amount, a technology use fee, which is applied at 5.8% of the permit cost. Schedule A is largely remains unchanged, although there are a few fees that were consolidated, apart from modifying the code enforcement fees to align with services provided. Schedule B it does have a handful of new fees, including crane lift encroachment permits, planning application fee, environmental program plan fees, and VMT monitoring fee, which our current fees are not included in the current fee schedule, but correlate with current services that are being provided. Planning fees have also seen a surge in some requests, some of which have been complimentary, such as project review meetings, preliminary application reviews, planning inspections, and special events. The schedule also includes sign permits and Mercury News ads, which have been added to clarify existing procedures. Schedule D experienced the most change of the four schedules. 4 new fees included larger additions, solar thermal systems, and accessory buildings. The most significant change in the proposed schedule involves the consolidation of the plan review and inspection fees, located on Table 1 and 2 of the Schedule D, previously the Schedule D, which several occupancy subclasses have been averaged into one table to enhance the usability by staff and clarity for citizens. The schedule also consolidated fees in the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing fee, Table 3, to become more general and inclusive. On to fiscal impact of the proposed fee schedule update. Based on the full cost recovery of the fee study, staff estimates approximately $775,000 of new revenues to the general fund, of which approximately $600,000 will be generated from Schedule B, $171,000 for planning fees, and $543,000 for building fees. Also discussed in the February 6th council meeting is the user fee cost recovery policy. Following council direction, staff incorporated the following key elements: an approximate 7-year cycle to complete a cost allocation plan and user fee study, an annual mechanism to increase the rates such as CPI, CCI, and a change in annual labor cost, a phase-in period for fees experiencing a greater year-over-year change, and a target cost recovery range for each schedule. As you can see here, Schedule's A target range is 100%, Schedule's B range is 75 to 100, Schedule's C range is 80 to 100, Schedule D's range is 50 to 80, and lastly, Schedule D target is set at market. At this time, staff is recommending the adoption of resolution approving fiscal year 24-25 fee schedules effective July 14th, 2024, and the user fee cost recovery policy. This ends my presentation, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, let's do council member questions. 5 minutes per council member. Council member Moore, you go first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for the prep session that we had. It's very helpful. We got a number of emails regarding the parking permit. Okay, so I'd like to understand that one a little bit better. It was $40, so what does that mean for people who live next to, say, Rancho San Antonio? I recall them coming and wanting some relief because of all the spillover parking. So what would happen to those residents in that neighborhood or over by the original Apple headquarters?
For that, we'd like to invite Director Mosley up to the podium.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of Council. Chad Mosley, Director of Public Works. With respect to your question regarding existing permit parking areas, the city in total has about 913 households that are that fall within permit parking zones. Of those 913, about 559 actually pull biannual permit parking permits. Each of those 559 properties would be subject to a $40 fee that would cover the permit parking for a 2-year period. So anybody who any of those 913 households who want to pull a permit would be subject to the $40 fee.
Okay, so that would be about little over $20,000 over 2 years, or $10,000 per year.
That is correct. We issue permit parking permit passes once every 2 years. We don't do it annually, we do it once every 2 years. And then we'll do it occasionally as a new homeowner comes in and may ask for permit parking at that time.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and I had one other question with regards, and I do have some more time, with regards to VMT monitoring. I'm not really sure what that is. I'm wondering if that is mitigation monitoring for VMT. Like the Carriage House had VMT mitigations, which included having the electrical bicycles available for all the units and providing, it might have been bus passes, bus routes, and that kind of information. Is this monitoring that, or is this something else?
It is along those lines, monitoring those ongoing VMT mitigations that the city needs to oversee. So city staff time would be applied to any VMT monitoring program.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. So I have 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Councilmember Fruin, Vice Mayor Fruin.
So don't go anywhere, Mr. Mosley. So if you can just sort of explain to us how the parking permit program works, because it seems to me that there's perhaps a number of people who are laboring under the misapprehension that somehow all of the signs would go away and that the restriction on parking would disappear. Is that the case?
That is not the case.
Okay.
No, the permit parking zones would still be established. Those are actually established via municipal code. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll reserve the rest of my time. Excuse me. 4:30.
Councilmember Wei.
So don't go away. Follow up with that because we got so many emails. So actually, if you're in a permit parking zone, if you don't pull the tax, you don't need to pay the fees.
That is correct.
And the $40 is for 2 years because that tax is good for 2 years. Because we got residents that I don't want to pay $40 a year, so why don't you make it 2 years? So it's actually is a 2 year.
That's correct.
Okay, so you're looking at revenues $599 times, it says times 40 is $22,000 for 2 years. That's the revenue you're looking at. So every year is about $11,000 if
Again,
the current permits stays.
Roughly, yes, but we issue permits once every 2 years.
Once every 2 years.
Yes.
So that tax is good for 2 years.
Correct.
That $40 tax is good for 2 years, so it's $20 a year if you
Yes.
want a tax. But if I live in a permit zone, if I don't need a tax, I don't have to pay for it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. And I am most concerned with the ADU, the add to the ADU cost, because that's our middle, the missing middle part. So which of the new fees, I know the crane lift encroachment fee is for ADU. How about the planning application review, the other fees? Any fees that associate with ADU, new fees? In addition to the crane, that I can recognize. Sorry, I should have asked this question.
That's all right. Ben, do you know if there's any other? I believe for most of the ADU related or building permit fees, ADUs are exempt from any planning approval. The reason we're adding the crane lifted encroachment permit is that it's a very expensive and complicated engineering endeavor. So we've been providing that service for free.
So how much would that be?
How much is the encroachment permit?
Give me a brief moment, I'll pull it up.
And while Jonathan's pulling up, Ben, can you confirm that there's no additional ADU fees?
That's correct, Madam City Manager. No new ADU fees. Our goal is to incentivize ADUs. So.
Thank you. So I think I'm more likely don't want to charge the ADUs because that's our missing middle housing element. So I'm going to reserve my two minutes. And
sure.
The crane permit, it's the encroachment permit. It's $1,400, $1,450.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Fruin.
So this one might require Director Fu. There we go. So in the course of our housing element discussion that we just completed, we included a strategy that will allow R1 properties to develop under R2 zoning standards. So which of the housing mitigation in lieu fees would such a project be paying? Because we have a different fee arrangement for single family homes than we do for multifamily homes.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think the fees will not necessarily be applicable for the zoning, but really for the net change of the actual units. So if you add in a unit, that's the unit that's being charged for.
Got it. So in a circumstance where you had a single family home and you used this policy to build 2 homes, then you would be assessed for 1 because it's 1 net new home.
That's correct.
Okay, even if you scraped off whatever was already there?
That's correct.
Okay.
Just for clarification, the parks and rec fees are not included.
Correct.
In this, right? So that's completely taken out of this study.
Yes, correct.
My other question was among the new fees, you had said something about solar something. Is it solar roof, solar something? Oh, so is that a completely brand new fee, or have people not been paying it all these years?
That is a new fee, a specific fee that building has included. Historically, from my understanding, they had used other codes. So with the increase in that activity, they decided to separate that one from a more general fee.
Okay, so it was there, but meshed with something else?
Correct.
All right, great, thank you. Councilmember Chow?
Yeah, so it's also regarding the distinction between ADU and the new policy on R2 lots. So someone can already add 3 ADUs and the fees will be waived on an R1 or R2 lot. But if someone choose to do duplex, triplex, their fee won't be waived as a result.
Yes, that's correct.
Maybe we should reconsider that, right? Because then it's cheaper to do ADU, but more expensive in terms of fees to have 2 a duplex or triplex. Okay. So if we would like to waive fees for this missing middle, what will be the process? Can we do it tonight? Or
I mean, council can certainly give us instruction to come back. As I mentioned earlier, our hope is that if council adopts the fee resolution today, it will become effective by mid-July. We're more than happy to come back with, but that will further delay the dates when the new fees become effective.
So we still have time before mid-July?
No, if you adopt today. It takes 60 days to become effective.
Oh, okay. So if we make any modification, we will delay the activation
That is correct.
Date. But next time, we do this every we do the fee schedule every year.
We do a CPI and CCI adjustment annually.
So next year, we could consider possibly waiving fees for duplex, triplex. That's
Absolutely. And I think to answer your first question, the reason for incentive for ADU is because we're trying to encourage more ADUs. So by waiving or providing waiving some of the fees, and to give other homeowners incentive to build ADUs.
Councilmember Moore.
Let's see this. I'm not really sure who to ask this question to, but one of the members of the public had a suggestion with regards to the permits. That, for instance, in and I don't know if I want to name the business, but in one area there's a business which was parking in a neighborhood, and their suggestion is that because that business was causing the overflow of parking, that they could somehow be asked to pay for their permits. Is there any way that we could do that? And you probably know which.
I think I understand which business, the fruit company that we all know in town. Yeah. So my understanding from Director Mosley is that 2/3 of the neighborhood usually petition to city to ask for a parking program to be in place, and then that application will come to before council for final approval. In that program, it doesn't really talk about who pays for what, because it has been provided for free all this time. As Director Mosley also mentioned, if the homeowners don't get the tag, they would not have to necessarily pay for the $40 every 2-year fee.
Okay, through the mayor. But if they don't get the tag, that means during those permitted hours, they don't get to have guests park on the street. They
Correct.
would get a ticket.
And I would like to emphasize that most properties in Cupertino have a 2-car garage and a 2-car and perhaps a 3-car driveway. So this will essentially be the 4th or 5th or 6th parking space for that property.
Oh, it could be. Oftentimes it's either a 2-car extra room or a storage cell. In reality, given how small some of the houses are. Okay.
However, I will say that we have no preference whether council wants to charge the $40 or not. As math calculated, we have roughly about $22,000 revenue for the next 2 years. It's certainly a council's discretion to either remove that from today's fee schedule or to keep it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm concerned with keeping the peace within the neighborhoods. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Fruin, you have 4 minutes.
To the city manager, with respect to the potential for waiving fees in order to encourage the new housing policy, was that something that you could bring back instead in tandem with the revision of R2 standards in order to enable that policy, or would it have to be a separate standalone item?
When you mentioned, are you looking at the rezoning opportunity that's coming up?
Or even later?
I believe that we have the rezoning coming up in July, and the objective design standard coming up in the fall. So those are the perfect opportunities to address these kind of issues.
Yeah, because my thinking here is simply we're not imposing a new fee. We would be reducing something that we've already done, so it should not be. It should not provoke a special legal issue.
We can certainly take that direction and come back either in July or in the fall.
Okay, I think that seems like an appropriate thing to consider, especially if we want to encourage that instead of ADUs necessarily.
Certainly.
The other thing I'll just point out for the sake of context, because of the number of emails that we've gotten and with respect to where they are, almost all of them are about one specific street, which is Larry Way. I am extraordinarily familiar with this street because my grandfather lives there. I, in essence, grew up on this street because I spent almost all of my early years there in what was effectively daycare. The consideration that was really animating a lot of the push to get permit parking there was less about who was parking on the street from the nameless fruit company and more about school pickup and drop off at Lawson. In large part because people would come early, they would hang out, they would park, they would block driveways, they would impede all kinds of things, and the permit parking solved that problem. So I just wanted to make sure that context was there for people to understand.
Councilmember Chow, 2 minutes.
So the $40 fee every 2 years covers is the full recovery cost, right? For the
It's a pretty good estimation for the staff cost.
But if someone had already a permit, they are just renewing it, wouldn't that doesn't need to cost as much?
We issued a new plaque.
But wouldn't the processing be simpler, so the maybe renewal doesn't
Not
cost as
necessarily,
much?
but again, council certainly has the discretion to provide that. It is a service that we have been providing for free.
But this is mitigating something the neighborhood suffers because of a lot of times not of their own doing. We are mitigating impact by, say, Apple or the food company. So basically, we are mitigating it on this neighborhood that's suffering from the impact of other things. And as a result, we are charging them for that. Doesn't make sense.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, my understanding...
Their development are approved by the city. Say we approve a development project in Site B, the neighborhood then will require permit parking because of the impact. Then we are charging the neighborhood.
My understanding is that this is usually petitioned by the neighborhood, not the development. So this is something that...
petitioned by the neighborhood because they suffer the impact.
Point out it's very unusual to authorize somebody to have the exclusive use of the public right-of-ways without charging a fee. I think that's I'm not sure if that's unique to Cupertino, but that's something that you would rarely see in any other jurisdiction. And you know, so I think that.
But still, we are mitigating an impact that's put on the residents by some city policies.
The impact, residents are using the public right-of-way free of charge.
That's everywhere. Yeah, okay.
Isn't it true that our neighboring cities charge for permit parking?
I believe so, and I think Director Mosley has that data. Do you want to briefly go over that?
Yeah, I can run through that really quickly. And I just did a quick assessment of some of the nearby cities. So Los Gatos charges $52 annually for your first vehicle, $72 for the second vehicle, $92 for the third, and $112 for the fourth. Palo Alto charges $51 per year per car. Sunnyvale, who is the closest to Cupertino, charges $22 for each car per year. Los Altos charges $110 per year. Mountain View charges $60 per year for the first car and $120 for your second car. So Cupertino is at the lowest, is the lowest of just these nearby cities. I didn't really go much beyond that.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Fruin.
To add some more context, the city of San Jose abolished its residential parking permit program because it found it too difficult to actually apply.
Okay. Let's take Councilmember Chow. We'll get back to you later. Let's take public comments on the fee schedule. How many cards do we have, Madam City Clerk?
Mayor, I have 3 cards requesting to speak in Community Hall, and I see 1 hand raised virtually.
Okay. So each one can speak for 3 minutes.
Okay, very good. So first we have Ned Britt, followed by Peggy Griffin, followed by Jennifer Griffin. I don't see Ned Britt. I believe he's left. So Peggy, would you like to speak? Welcome.
Good evening, council members and staff. My complaint with the parking fee is that the people who have permit parking were not notified. You were going to notify them with the bill rather than at a time when they could speak. And the only emails you got were because somebody posted on Nextdoor and somebody spread the word. But they were not notified by the city that all of a sudden they were going to be charged. And that's not right. The other thing is, with all these fees, I think you should have the ability to waive them for disabled, for low income. There's one for checking the doors for ADA compliance. Well, if someone just all of a sudden ended up in a wheelchair permanently and has to make changes, don't charge them for it. Waive the fees. If they're too poor, if they're low income and they happen to live in a parking permitted area, waive the fees. So I think, and there's probably other fees that are like that, but I didn't see any ability to waive fees. And you should notify people before you impose this fee, not after you've already passed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Next we have Jennifer Griffin, followed by Rhoda Fry. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, City Council. The issue of fees with ADUs, I have witnessed parts of homes being brought in with cranes. It's quite terrifying for the neighbors. It's also terrifying because the little devil monsters of ADUs by the state, they don't have to tell anyone. Los Altos, they don't even have to tell the neighbors. Neighbors have wound up with ADUs stuck under oak trees, stuck like 10 feet above the neighbor's backyard where their granddaughter plays. And to try to say that ADUs are a blessing and savior for the city, they're not. A lot of people, I really find this offensive that ADUs are being used as the little savior that's going to save our city. The real truth is that a lot of people are treating them like they were a sixth bedroom. And if you look at the real estate ads, and believe me, we get inundated with all of our mail is please sell your house. Every one of those homes that has an ADU tax it onto the number of bedrooms and in the number of bathrooms. They don't say that there's an ADU. They say, oh, we have a six bedroom, 4 bathroom house. So I don't think that they should get a break out of it. The other thing is too, you could have a homeowner that has a primary house and he can have 3 ADUs on his property, but he could be pulling in $5,000 a month in income from those. So why not tax them? I really think that we need to get off our little ADU pedestal because a lot of people are not using them for what they should be intended, which is for student housing, maybe having grandparents handicapped, etc. It's an easy way to get a big house and just blow up anything that the city, that the public worked on for years. I miscarried on the night that we actually had the lot to ratio or whatever that was. I went home and miscarried, began a 5-day miscarriage. Okay, I have sacrificed a lot for those. And I really resent it when these people come in and they are listing these homes as 6 bedrooms. I gave up my baby for that. Okay, it hurts really bad. So please think about that. Let's don't think that ADUs are God's gift to Cupertino. Let's tax the heck out of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next we have Rhoda Fry. Welcome, Rhoda.
Hi, I'd like to thank Mr. Mosley for giving some comparison on the rates. Really like to drill down a little bit more on that because I don't know what the nexus is in these other communities. I'm going to read a little bit about what I wrote you today, so my comments are available online. So from what I've seen from some of the permit parking fees, you know, I'm against it because it's not fair to the residents. Most of the residents get these permits due to external forces beyond their control. As we've already talked about what's going on with Apple. Why should residents shoulder the burden of something they didn't create? Let's say that the neighbors of the tessellation schools, which is leasing the Regnard school site, decide that they needed to have a permit parking. Again, not a problem that the residents created. It's not fair. I don't have a parking permit. I don't expect to get one. I'm writing this because it's telling you I think it's a fairness issue. And guess what? Tessellations doesn't appear to have a business license, and that would help defray the cost of permits. Think about that. So I think schools are around $342 a year. With respect to credit card fees, I do business with a number of cities in the Bay Area, and I have never seen a fee at 3.4%. So let's just please make sure it's fair. Please keep in mind there needs to be a nexus for a fee, because if not, you're implementing a tax, and taxes need to be voted on by your constituents. Those are the people who voted for you, who are at the top of the org chart, which somehow the residents don't exist anymore. Sorry, that's a cheap shot, but I'd really like to know who did that to us. So how was the 3.4% cost determined? What is the cost of processing ACH or paper checks? I think the credit card fee should be the actual cost minus the ACH paper check cost. So that's that. I'm going to go back to business license for a little bit, because there is a mention of small income business license. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what that is. Is that different from a business license? And I'm going to go drill down a little bit more on the business license issues. And again, I know business licenses aren't fees or tax, but getting businesses to have business licenses in our city would help the budget. And one of the things that we see that when the city has contracts, and I think this is fantastic, we make sure that they've got liability insurance, workers' comp, etc. We should also make sure that they have a business license. This is low-hanging fruit, okay? In addition, businesses in Cupertino are not paying their share of business licenses. So, I actually went through some recent agreements, and I could see over and over again, companies doing business in the city of Cupertino do not have business licenses, and that's not okay. I also looked at other types of businesses in the city, bakeries, etc. And again, let's dedicate some staff time to get the city's
Thank you, Rhoda. That is your time.
Licenses. Thank you.
And there is one person requesting to speak virtually, San R. Welcome, San.
Good evening, Mayor Sheila and City Council. I would like to draw your attention specifically to a few fees that I hope you will reduce or eliminate. There is a false alarm fee increase of 24.7%. I understand false alarms should be avoided. However, accidents happen, mistakes happen. Sometimes there's a door that's blown by the wind, and false alarms do happen. So raising fees on restaurants, especially at a time when crime is rising and we're asking everyone to have alarms, please reduce or eliminate that fee hike of a false alarm of 24.7%. I also see a pattern of single-family residential fees for permits being steeply hiked. Residential permits fee is up 48%. Zoning planning fees up 535%. A parcel map is up 20%. Please don't penalize homeowners. Our homeowners that are remodeling their homes probably have lived in their homes for decades. They are the ones that can least afford it. They're finally taking steps to improve their homes. Let's not penalize single-family homeowners. Those are the ones that are really having skin in the game in our city. Let's make sure that we collect our fees off of the developers of these commercial properties that can easily afford these fees. I see us going the opposite direction constantly, where we're trying to tax the residents on other previous proposals, and now we're trying to raise fees on residents, whereas the raises on commercial and multifamily is only 2.4%. So please do not take a disproportionate share out of residences while going easy on commercial multifamily. Please do not do that. Please do the reverse. I'd also like to encourage you to further raise the fees on soliciting permits. The solicitors are a nuisance in the neighborhoods. Oftentimes it's dubious businesses, or it's businesses that maybe even scouting for who's not at home, or people under the guise of being a business scouting for who's not at home. So please raise the fees steeply on the solicitor permit. That's one that we would all like to see increased. And finally, I just want to say thank you for keeping residences and your residents in mind and not raising fees on them. Please do not increase our fees. and focus on where people can afford it. Thank you.
Thank you, San. Mayor, no additional speakers for this item.
Okay, so the public comment section is over, and let's bring it back to council. For deliberation purposes, it would be good to see a motion, and I see Councilmember Way's light on. So.
I would like to make a motion for the recommended fee increase, but to adjust 2 items. First is to not charge the crane lift encroachment permits. We just approved our housing element, and we really need to work that ADU. No matter what it says, it's for the missing middle, and also I'm looking at $11,000 per year for the permit cost, and we got so many people that really don't like it, so I would like to not charge that for the permit fees. So that's my 2 adds to the recommendation, that staff recommendation. That is my motion.
Second.
Okay, so okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Any other comments? So this is accepting the staff report, other than for the 2 items that Councilmember Way made a motion on and Vice Mayor Fruin accepted. Councilmember Moore, you had a comment?
Okay, I just want to clarify. So one was the crane lift encroachment permit, and what was the second? The parking. Okay. I have a question for staff regarding the encroachment permit, because within the past couple of weeks, I was driving down Tantau and I saw that one of the streets, it might have been Tilson, it was completely blocked off. There was a very large crane. There were, I don't know if it was city employees out there, but traffic had to be rerouted in that area. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It might be within the last month, but there was something being lifted. I don't even think it was an ADU, but would that be something that would be qualifying for this crane encroachment permit? And what is all involved with getting one of those cranes out? Does it stay in this? Is it in the city right away? What happens there?
With respect to the crane lift permits, one of the reasons we've kind of implemented that is we're focusing mostly on when you have a crane that has to have its lift go out over residential property. And so that could be for a PG&E pole that's located in a backyard, could be for an ADU, as what was indicated. Part of this is the coordination. Staff has to do a lot of coordination to make sure that each of the property owners who that crane lift is going out is aware of it, has signed off on it. We don't want a crane going over somebody's house and then God forbid something happen. So it's really about the additional coordination necessary to make sure all interested parties are aware and have agreed to the action.
Thank you.
So but the stuff on Tilson, that was all in the public right of way. That would be just a standard encroachment permit because that's just city property there.
Okay, thank you. And so also the insurance portion, does the city have to review that, those kinds of documents?
We always verify insurance.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Vice Mayor Fruin? Oh, sorry. Okay. Did you want to say something? Oh. Okay, Councilmember Chow, 2 minutes, please.
Some questions.
Sorry, 5 minutes.
Some questions. So do we have any fee waiver application process right now for low-income residents?
For these schedules, no. We do have a fee waiver for the business licenses, or a reduced fee.
For what condition?
Business licenses.
How
for
can
these particular schedules, there are no reduced fees.
Okay. And do we have any enforcement process right now for business license? I think there are some businesses that people didn't even realize they need to apply for license.
That would be on a different item. For these schedules, we're not
'cause-
discussing that.
Okay. And so in terms of single-family home permits, with the amount of increase that's proposed, let's say for a typical 2,500 square foot single-family home, how much increase in fees they will see?
It really depends, and that's based on the building permit. So, are you remodeling? Are you totally tear down and rebuild? Are you adding on to the second floor? So, it really depends on what the scope
Can I
is.
get some rough number of these situations? How much increase?
I mean, Sean, do you have an idea how much we're going up? 30%, 20%?
Sorry, I think that'd be more. I'm not quite sure what the exact percentage would be.
So typically, my understanding is that building permit is based on valuation. Right.
Well, it's based off of a price per square foot.
Right. So it really depends on how the contractor and the homeowner scope the project. So if they're saying that they're just making a small addition, but in reality, they're actually making a huge addition. So it's really hard to gauge a percentage of where the fee's going.
Okay. Okay. The other question is regarding the parking enforcement. I guess that's not on the agenda. I'll ask that later. Okay.
I had a quick question on the impact of the changes made to the staff report, the motion that's currently on the table. What would be the financial impact of these two going ahead with the changes that the motion indicates?
I may be best to handle that one. For the permit parking, right now, the permit parking is free and staff spends time on that, so the difference to the city there is about $20,000. For the crane lifts, our standard encroachment permit, which is what we've issued in the past, is about, depending on location, can be anywhere from $800 to $1,200. I don't. In the past year, we've maybe issued a dozen or so crane lifts, so we're not talking huge money. It's just staff has been requested to look for ways to ensure that we are having cost recovery in our actions, and that's why these fees are being imposed.
Great, thank you. That was helpful. Vice Mayor Fruin?
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants to fault staff for doing exactly what we told you to do, which was to go and try to, pursue full cost recovery. Meetings like this are for identifying those things that maybe we aren't quite so satisfied with. Mm-hmm. I certainly think that the notion of, an element of surprise for those who would be receiving a bill for the first time as their notice on the parking fees is certainly well taken. But I do think that given what our peer jurisdictions do, that it's certainly worth having this conversation at a different time and in a different context, perhaps in the course of implementation of parts of the mobility element in the future. I just don't think that's today. So I think that we do need to have a conversation at some point about who bears that cost and why.
Councilmember Moore?
Okay, so I have to agree with regards to parking. I think that we're going to need to have a discussion because there's been waivers of parking requirements, and at some point it's going to be some prime space within the city that different entities are going to be wanting to use. With regards to the crane lift encroachment permit, waiving that cost, I would like to know if, because we talked about modular homes within the housing element, to allow them across the city. I don't know if a modular home would need to have a crane lift in order to set it into place. I could anticipate that it could as well. So there might want to monitor this and see how much crane lift encroaching is actually happening in the next couple of years. I think that would be pretty smart. I'd also like it if we could track, because this is to help the ADUs, if we keep track of that, and hopefully the parking issue can come back, because there's There's a lot of information about parking within the housing element. And then we have the housing laws also impacting parking, who has to supply it or not. So it may be down the road that we're going to question whether we allow these permitted zones at all. So that unfortunately might be what we're looking at in the future. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Way.
So I just want to explain why I did say let's just waive the $40 for every 2 years. So every year is about $11,000. I take into the public comments very seriously, and I understand one of the residents said we should, waive for handicapped, for seniors. I think it takes more staff time to really work on waiving those fees instead of just not charging it. So that's why I think it's better just not to charge it, and that's my reason for it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Chow. Last comment
so
before we wrap up.
With the state law to limit parking and restrict parking requirement, we will see more permit parking needs. I wonder if it's possible to cover permit parking insurance cost with traffic mitigation fees, which will be paid by development. Does that make sense for the city to use traffic mitigation fees that we collect to cover residential permit expenses?
It's possible that it could be a condition imposed on new development. What I've seen more commonly is that residents of newly permitted developments are not permitted to get residential street residential parking fees permits, which avoids impacting street parking in the area of the new development for existing homeowners.
Thank you.
Thank you. That seems to end all council's deliberations on the item. We have a motion. Would you like to restate it since we've had some discussions? Councilmember Way? You're good? Okay. All right. We have a accepting the report with the two changes suggested by Councilmember Way. There is a second from Vice Mayor Fruin. So let's just go ahead and vote with lights, please.
The motion carries unanimously.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's move to the consent calendar. There's one item on the consent calendar. Okay, 5 minutes it is. It's 10:01, back at 10:05, 10:06. Okay. Okay. Welcome back, Council. Our 5-minute recess is up. And the last item, the consent calendar, has the item been pulled?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Chow pulled the item.
Okay. Councilmember Chow, since you've pulled the item, let's take public comments first. Should we take public comments first? Yeah. Okay. Are there any public comments about the city's investment policy?
Yes, Mayor. I have one request to speak from Peggy Griffin.
Yeah. Okay. 3 minutes, please.
Welcome, Peggy.
Hi. Good evening, council members and staff. I'm going to use the overhead. In the handouts, the material for this item, there's a letter from Chandler Asset Manager that says that the investment policy is okay. There doesn't need to be any changes. And yet, we have a change, and it's regarding moving money. And I want to know why it's added, why it was added when they said there was no need for changes, and was the $45 million moved in March 2024 moved without authority, and is that why this is being added? And another question that I didn't write down here is, I don't know who the city treasurer is. I've read that every year the council is supposed to appoint, or whatever the term is, but I can't find anything that says it. And I'd like to have confirmation that the city treasurer has qualifications. That, I mean, they're moving a lot of money. And I'd like to know that they know what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. And next we have Rhoda Fry. Welcome, Rhoda.
Hi, you have my written comments already. So one of the things I want to echo what Peggy was talking about, it just seems like there's an inconsistency municipal code and elsewhere regarding the appointment of the treasurer's roles. So on April 24, the investment policy was on the audit committee's agenda. Why didn't it come to City Council on May 7th when there are few agenda items? And why is the staff report different now from what the audit committee received? So you have that now. And both staff reports actually failed to mention this significant change, which was by, you know, it just says by adopting policy, City Council delegates the City Treasurer to authority to invest or reinvest city funds, according to Government Code 53607. And prior to this policy, this $45 million were moved, and I wonder who had the authority to do so. The policy was not in place, and we didn't have an appointed treasurer at the time, because that is what our city's annual report says every year, that the City Council appoints a treasurer. Hasn't happened in many years, so what's going on with that? And of course, the city has allowed cash and cash equivalents to be uninvested, which has significantly impacted our public funds. And it seems like the money started piling up after Carol Atwood and Jennifer Chang left the employ of the city. And the cost to the city of not investing our cash has actually been far greater than that of the embezzlement. And regarding the reference government code, the authority of the legislative body to invest or reinvest funds of local agency or sell exchange securities so purchased may be delegated for 1 year period by the legislative body, that's you, to the treasurer of the local agency, who shall thereafter assume full responsibility for the transactions until the delegation of authority is revoked or expires, and shall make monthly report of those transactions to the legislative body. And so, by the way, with respect to the monthly report, I'd like to see in the agenda that there are that there have been city the memos to the council, so that we, the public, know that there are memos to the council and that those transactions are available online, because otherwise they'll be hidden. So anyway, it's subject to review. The legislative body may renew the delegation, etc. The City Council has not appointed a treasurer in years. It seems to happen annually. What happened? Why didn't the Finance Department make sure the annual appointment had been made? Finally, I've read through some of the court documents regarding embezzlement, and the defendant has made statements that the city lacked internal controls and was aware that there was a lack of internal controls. We've seen this in our reports from the city's auditors. The defendant even mentions our current mayor, who at the time of the defendant was a direct report. Our mayor has held a number of finance jobs and has served the committee.
Thank you, Rhoda. That was your time.
Thank you.
And there's one hand raised virtually, Mayor San R. Welcome, San.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. There's one area that I am not clear on that I would like to bring up, which is with the recent raise in federal interest rates, Treasury bills are both liquid and fully protected. And it's not clear to me why we're using suboptimal fixed income instruments instead of using Treasury bills that have 4-week maturity rates that are as high as 5.37%. So it's something that I hope you can have our finance department and or the Chandler Investments to look into as to whether Treasury bills would provide us the balance of liquidity and principal protection while still yielding up to 5.3%. Monthly Treasury expiry bills are 5.37%, and you have varying ladders that you can set up so that you have that balance of liquidity if you need. So we are seeing no indication that rates are going to decrease. This may be a condition that prevails for maybe another year, maybe another 2 years. Even if they do decrease, they're not going back to zero anytime soon. So I hope the city will review the possibility of using T-bills as a form of getting the best possible yields with the most protection. Thank you.
Thank you, San. Mayor, no further speakers for this item.
Okay. So that was the end of the public comments. Let's bring it back to council. And I want to go with you, Councilmember Chow. You requested that this item be pulled. What reasons did you have?
So I think the public has raised the issue of how come we have almost $50 million sitting in checking. And as a result of that, I looked at all of this. I sampled one investment report every year for the past 10 years and up to 2012. And the city has been keeping about 15 to 16% of our total portfolio in checking account, while the other cities keep about only 2% of their total portfolio in checking. So I would like to understand what's the rationale for the Cupertino to keep very high percentage in checking, not earning interest. But before 2014, in 2012 or 13, we had 2%. So we were keeping a much lower balance in checking earlier. So I would like to understand what's the process to decide how much we keep in checking, how much we keep in left, the lower, kind of like a money market for government. And I understand from staff, treasurer bill is also one of the options. And why are we not using those? So, and then how do we decide more? I think some money could be kept in a short term, like 6 months, but earning higher interest. So I would like to understand this topic.
Sure. So thank you for your questions. I believe we have issued a supplemental memo to address all of your questions. More than happy to walk through them again, but high level. So the city's priority for our asset is safety and also liquidity. We want to make sure that we're not here to make money. We're not for-profit organization. We want to make sure that we're protecting our investment wisely. At the same time, I do want to emphasize that absent a policy being adopted today, we will not be able to make any investment for our funding because there will not be a policy in place until the policy is adopted by council. So absent that, I believe that we have addressed, Councilmember Chow, your questions pretty detailed in the supplemental. But if you would like us to walk you through verbally, Jonathan's more than happy to do that.
Councilmember Chow.
So I think it's for the public's benefit that we get a lot of this answered today. So if the staff can provide answers.
It's in the supplemental.
I know. I have not really actually have time to read through the supplemental answers.
Jonathan, would you
today.
like to walk us through briefly?
Can we get some answers?
I can't speak too much to the history of the city, but currently we have approximately 15 to 16 million in our checking. So since I've been here in the last year, there's been quite a bit of uncertainty with the requirements of cash for the city to meet its obligations, specifically regarding the CDTFA audit. For that reason, there's been a higher amount in our general checking. As of late, you did see that $45 million transfer to LAIF, and that is due to our better understanding of how the cash flow the city will be needing in the short run. And so once it becomes, once we have a better understanding when we need to use those funds, we'll go ahead and pull those back from LAIF and disperse those funds. And then in terms of not transferring to Chandler, we've had these conversations with both Chandler and Wells Fargo to see how we would be able to maintain liquidity and safety in these funds while maintaining, not pursuing that interest that a lot of cities would typically have.
So we do have the ability to invest in treasury bills today, if we want to, right? With the current policy.
Certainly, but it would start, I guess, encroaching on the plan or the investment strategy that we have with Chandler. So again, going back to the uncertainty with CDTF audit,
But we know that CDTFA is not going to ask us to pay them back next month. Usually they will give us a payment schedule, and their government agency knows how government agency operate. They are not going to surprise us with tens of millions of dollars of payment. I don't think that's a good reason for keeping cash at hand.
I understand a lot of that did come to at the city's better understanding as of the last few months that there would be no immediate payback to CDTFA, but there are other obligations the city will have to be paying, and
okay.
I'll leave it at that.
So if I can have more time for more questions that the public has asked, that would be great.
Councilmember Moore?
Okay, thank you. So the current investment policy, is it effective through June 30th of 2024? Is that correct?
The current policy expires in 2 days.
Okay, so why is the next one going through the end of the fiscal year and this one is expiring?
So historically, the city wouldn't capture wouldn't approve the investment policy for the following fiscal year, which is what you would see in a lot of other agencies. So what we're doing here is getting approved from the 16th on to the end of the next fiscal year, so we're not pushed into an instance similar to today, where if it's not passed, we'll have a lapse of time where we cannot make investments. So in the future, before approaching the end of a fiscal year, we'll come back to council and have that approval for that investment policy that covers the preceding fiscal year.
I'm sorry, so the previous investment policy had an effective date, because I can't tell here, it's been redlined. It just said effective May 16th, 2023, but it didn't say through what date.
So it is a requirement for investment policies to be approved each year. And so without it having essentially an end date, you make the assumption that date is, the expiration date is a year from the day it was approved or went into effect.
I think effectively the change covers the gap. So we're not constantly going, so now it can't be the 15th. So when we're looking at the council meetings first and third Tuesday, right, we have to make sure we get it ahead of when the policy is expiring. So by adding this expiration date through the end of the fiscal year, it allows us time we'd still have it on audit committee to go to them in April, and then allows us to bring it back to city council, but we're not necessarily chasing the date in terms of when was the last date that we took it. It just brings it through the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, so personally, I'd be more inclined to extend the current investment policy through the end of the current fiscal year and give us some more time to look at how we have the investments distributed, because we're getting some really good questions with regards to the investment mix. So kind of how this came about, actually, at the end of February, I had been reviewing some public records requests on our city website that other people had made, and there was one which indicated that the Wells Fargo checking account had grown to $48 million. And I had been on the audit committee back in 2022, and I recalled that it had been at $30 million at that point. So it grew to $48 million, and I had to ask some questions about why I also wanted to know if it was an interest-bearing checking account, and found that it was not interest-bearing, and that caused great concern because we're sitting around 5% right now. And then I was told that the money needed to be in that account for operating expenses. But then at the previous audit committee meeting, within the documents, it was noted that $45 million had been moved from that account into the LAIF account. And the LAIF account is balanced somewhat like the Chandler account. So it's safety, safety, liquidity, and yield. You do need to get the yield part. So we don't want our money to be parked, not working for us. And then when you review our investment policy, you don't see that there is a maximum amount of non-interest bearing accounts allowed. That would be your basically parking it in a checking account that doesn't make any interest. And that's we don't have that rule. However, there are policies from the state, kind of best practices for sweeping that money. And when you look at, for instance, the City of Morgan Hills investment policy, they have authorized investments. There was a question about U.S. Treasury bills. They have no limit. The Dreyfus Treasury Cash Management Fund, there's no limit on that. And some of these you can have a very short-term window, so that if you do need to pull your money out of that, you're not tied into something with a long-term horizon. Well, I'm out of time. I do have some more comments, but hopefully I'll get some in a minute.
I had a comment. The investment policy of relative to last year, is there any major difference between last year's investment policy and this one?
None other than what's been discussed, just aligning the resolution and code with aligning the policy with resolution and code with that added language, and extending the effective date through the end of the fiscal year. Everything else remained the same.
Okay. And
Mary, if I may, I think so the added sentence was because there has been an increased amount of confusion, who's the city treasurer, who appoints that. So we're basically realigning the policy with the Muni Code.
Right. And I thought I saw a response from Finance that you will come back again in October to review.
So we understand that there's some concern about how the policy, how the investment has been made recently. So we're actually taking that lead in discussing with Chandler, our investment vendor, and hopefully for the next several months, we'll come back in the fall, September, October timeframe, to provide an update to see where are we in line with other cities. Are we too conservative? Can we be more progressive? But our goal is to have a policy adopted today so we can continue to make investment of our fund. If we don't, we will just have those money sitting idle in the account right now. So we're really hoping that we can get to a conclusion point, but we will come back if this is a direction that City Council would like us to proceed.
Okay. Is there a representative from Chandler on call?
I believe Carlos is available online. Is there a question for him?
No, I was wondering if he wanted to make a brief statement on investment policies.
Sure.
Absolutely. I hope you could hear me okay, council members. This is Carlos Oblitas from Chandler Asset Management, and I am your representative from Chandler and your investment advisor. Chandler manages but a portion of the city's investments in an actively managed strategy. There are portions that we don't manage, which are the portions that you're discussing as to if there's a better structure to have them. What I'd like to say is that just a couple things. From an operational perspective, this is something that we discuss regularly with staff. We're in contact and weigh different options that there are. In some instances, there are some other options that we can look at that have no limits, like treasuries. You currently do buy treasuries in the portfolio, and you hold a sizable amount. Money funds, money market mutual funds, whether governmental or not, do have a limit of 20% per California government code. But certainly there is capacity to use some of those in combination with other options. Right now, the investment policy, the way that it is written, we reviewed it, and our statement that it needed no changes was specific to changes to California government code or the asset classes that we purchased, or any changes to the governance, other than the movements that staff took to align the policy better with the municipal code. So that's the statement I wanted to make, and of course I'll take any questions that you may have.
Okay, so no, I'm not sure we have any questions at this point, but just to I just wanted to reiterate that you will come back again a few months from now when we will know the true results of the CDTFA audit, which we don't know as yet, and that'll give, I think, a better picture of how our investments will shape up in the next 1 year. Council Member Moore, did you have a question for Jan?
Yes. Hi, Carlos. Nice to see you again. So you are our investment advisor with Chandler, and I've been reading some...
Excuse me, Councilmember Moore, I'll give you 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. I've been reading some about investment analysts, and I was wondering what would be the different roles, because I've tried to understand how it is that the city made the decision to utilize Chandler, and how do they make the decision to whether or not to send the $45 million to LAIF or to put it into something like the Dreyfus, let me get the full name, the Dreyfus Treasury Cash Management Fund, like Morgan Hill does, and if you have some insight as to how those decisions came about, who's making those choices. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councilmember Moore, and it's a delight to see you again. So we were selected through a competitive process by the city. At the time, it included the Finance Committee, your staff. We had to respond to a competitive request for proposal, and then interviewed and weighed, and that's how we were selected. In terms of how the choices are made, in terms of divvying up the money between the longer-term portfolio that Chandler manages on your behalf versus shorter-term investments, that's a decision that ultimately is made by staff, but we consult on that. So, for example, when we began working with the city, one of the first things that we did is we conducted a statistical cash flow analysis on how the city had been using its funds in the past, and we utilized patterns from the past to extrapolate what those funds may look like in the future. Of course, that statistical analysis does not encompass any unknown events, such as the CDTFA audit, which is weighed heavily on how the city has structured its cash. Ultimately, how that's structured, the ratio between the longer-term fund that we manage and the shorter-term cash is ultimately determined by staff based on what they're seeing coming down the pike in terms of cash needs. We've been in contact with staff as to the different options that can be had for that short-term cash. Some of them have pluses, some of them have minuses. There's some advantages and disadvantages, but they've been presented. They evolve, obviously, and there are some limits for California government code. Your policy has some language also which addresses the amount of liquidity that needs to be kept. It's not as specific in terms of the amount of money that must be kept in a cash account, like a bank account. But of course, if it is the will of the council, that's something that can certainly be explored and added to there. The way the language currently is written simply states that you have to have at least half of a year's expenditures available in short-term investments, which is defined as a year or less. So obviously, if that's some direction of the council, if that's the will of the council, we are happy to consult on that and show how that can be done. Apart from that, the longer-term portfolio that we manage has a strategy. It's diversified amongst different maturities. Part of it is to hold shorter-term treasuries. Part of it is to hold longer-term treasuries. Part of it, of course, holds other types of assets which are offering competitive yields, all of them allowed by California government code, all deemed to be safe through our credit analysis. We try and mitigate risk. We really see ourselves as risk managers. But of course, we generate excess return for you, and we report to those on a monthly basis. And I do that in person on a quarterly basis.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councilmember Wei.
So thank you, Mayor Mohan. I'd like to clarify a few items. I kept on hearing $45 million is going to make us millions of dollars interest. We can't put all $40 million away because our weekly payables is a lot. So what is, I think we have the misconcept of we can invest this $45 million. The second is the investment policy that you're doing right now is well within the investment policies that the council set.
Correct.
Okay, and my other question is, we are looking at, we have professional management, okay, that's managing our portfolio. And we have, I think a couple of residents did come to the audit commission. It's been clearly explained that we have state laws to follow. We can't just invest money anywhere we want to. So there are strict laws that the state defines where the public agency can or cannot invest their money into. Is that a correct statement?
That is also correct.
So I want to say, I really want to say we should trust our staff to really work with the investors and work with what's the best for the city. And as to the CTFA, because of the uncertainty, all of a sudden, maybe that's not all of a sudden, 30 million, 2012 or 2020, right now it's 45 million. Is that, we're not looking at $45 million of interest. And also my next question is, interest rate has gone up just recently, right?
Correct.
I remember it used to be my savings account is close to zero interest too. So I really want to correct this misconception that because of mismanagement, we're losing millions of dollars interest. That's first, I want to make that clear. We're not losing millions of dollars interest. You're looking at very short-term interest that has risen just past recently. And the investment that you're doing right now with LAIF, that is a very common practice for all public agencies, including school district. I was school district for 11 years. We work with the county, pour money into the county. Is that a common practice for cities to put money into LAIF?
Yes, most cities do have an account with LAIF, apart from possibly another investment avenue like CAMP or one administered by a county.
So I think certainly we could review our investment policy, because I think maybe Cupertino has a pretty conservative investment policy, which really brings safety up at first, up in the front. So if this council has the will to review our investment policy, to more change it a little bit, I have no objection, because I think this investment policy was made how many years ago? That probably hasn't changed much.
I think we made the we made the update when update to our policy, our more comprehensive update when Chandler came on board, but we update it annually as necessary as state code changes or if there's other changes that
Right,
need to
but
be
it states there's a pretty conservative investment policy.
It's mostly based off the state government code for investment, so it is very conservative.
So my last question is to add, to answer, I think City Manager Wu answered it, to add by adopting the policy, that red line, it just explains, put it more, it doesn't add more power to the treasurer. It kind of just explains the policy in line that's already been there. Is that a correct statement?
That is a correct statement.
Okay, thank you. I have minute 14.
Okay, Councilmember Chow.
Thank you. I think we
3
didn't
minutes,
get
please.
5 minutes for question earlier.
Did we not? Is that what you're
We
saying?
didn't. Yeah,
We
we
didn't.
went to public comment directly.
No, it came back. It came
Yeah,
back to
then
us.
we get 5 minutes only after the public
Okay,
comment.
how about
yeah.
3 minutes from now?
So, for the record, I'm guilty of doing my own research. I looked at Palo Alto. They have double our annual budget, and they keep about 0.4% of portfolio, 2 to 3 million in cash, and the Mountain View, 0.25%, about $2-3 million in cash, and our before CDTFA audit, Cupertino has consistently since 2015 maybe kept 15 to 16% in cash. That has been our practice. However, prior to 2014, we had 2% like other cities. And I looked at all the investment policies in the past 10 years, guilty of doing my own research. There hasn't been significant change in the investment policy. So my question is, with the current policy, is it sufficient for us to be comparable as other cities to keep about 1 to 2% of portfolio in cash, and then some in LAF or short-term investment, and still be able to operate, because every other city is doing that, and we used to do that.
So the policy sets the guidelines. It doesn't necessarily tell us that we need to hold 15, 16% of our policy. We can certainly work our way down to that lower amount in ready cash, or what's sitting in our Wells Fargo account, and the rest of it sitting in whether LAIF or with Chandler. So it's just, again, the policy sets the guideline. We can move in that direction. There's nothing keeping us from getting there. It's just
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then a question that many people asked again and again. Are we supposed to appoint a city treasurer annually? Is there like a state law? Has some law changed?
No, the city treasurer is appointed ex officio, is the director of administrative services per the municipal code.
So we don't have to appoint that annually?
No.
And I think a few years back, we had something on the council agenda to appoint the deputy city treasurer, and that person has left. So are we supposed to also appoint a deputy city manager?
I would not. I'm not familiar with that agenda item. It's not immediately clear to me why the council would appoint a deputy city treasurer.
Okay. And I think in other cities' investment policy, they also have similar practice that city treasurer is also director of administrative service. However, they made it more clear in the investment policy that city treasurer is administrative service, but they all still report to city manager. So ultimately, city manager is responsible for all the investment under the direction of council. I think if we can make that adjustment in the next version of the policy to make it more clear and self-containing in this policy, that would be great.
I believe that's in the red line. That's in the policy right now.
The policy right now, just the red line only gives the city treasurer the authority, but didn't make it clear. City treasurer is the director of administrative service, and they report to the city manager.
When we go back and when we revisit the cash management section, if we need to include that in the policy, we can add a specific line stating that the administrative services director is the treasurer.
Yeah, more clear roles and
We'll
responsibilities.
specifically call that out.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the non-interest-bearing Wells Fargo account at the end of February had a little over $48 million. Is that correct?
If I remember correctly.
Okay, so and it has grown. So we had 48 million not getting any interest. The interest rates have been about 5% for the past year. So then $45 million was moved into the LAIF account on March 11th, and now the current balance for the non-interest bearing Wells Fargo account is around $16 or $17 million. Is that accurate?
I want to say it's closer to 20, but right around there.
Oh boy. Okay, and I do want to thank Councilmember Chow for, I believe you went back on this account over the past to 2012, getting balances. Thank you, because I had requested staff to provide a June balance of that account going back 10 years, and I was told that I would get it sometime in June. So if you could email me what you got, I would appreciate it. So I just wanted to clear that up. We have lost millions of dollars in interest. Thank you.
Councilmember Wei, let's go to Councilmember Wei. She had her light on. Can I have?
I have 1 minute.
Yeah, you have 1 minute.
Or
yes.
you give me a better.
No, I'll give you 1
minutes?
minute. No, I'll give you 1 minute.
Okay. So my question is, for the administrative, like Christina, you're both treasurer and our administrative services, but it doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. Is it possible that one day we might have a treasurer and a separate administrative service director?
the municipal code would need to be amended for that to happen.
Understood. Okay, so that's good. And on the other says to say that they report to the city manager. They all report to the city manager. Every staff that's here, except our city attorney, we don't have to specify say that they report to the city manager because they do. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct. I believe our org chart also reflects it with an asterisk saying treasurer is the director of administrative services, and that org chart shows that I report to city manager.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councilmember Chow, you have 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. Just want to clarify where I got my data. I think I learned finally how to read the treasurer's quarterly investment report. And from the December 31st ending investment report, I find out we do have $48 million in checking. And I sampled the past years. I try to get the same period, Q2 of each year, the quarterly investment report. Fortunately, these are all on City Council agenda, so it was easy to look them up from all the City Council agenda items, and then that's how I got them. But a couple of years I didn't get the Q2. They were not on the council agenda, but I found a similar thing, so that's where I got them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore, 1 minute, please.
Okay, thank you. I think there is some confusion when you look at the city manager chapter 2.28. The services, it's 2.28.040, powers and duties, where it says under C, the services and facilities of the city treasurer and the city attorney shall be made available to the city manager to the same extent and in the same manner that the services are available to the city council. And that was something I brought up with regards to the organizational chart, because the treasurer prior to this year's budget had been attached to the city council, actually. And so this gives the appearance that we have some direction ability with regards to the city treasurer, perhaps, or that it's a relic, and that from when the city council was appointing the city treasurer, because up until around 67 or 71, the council was appointing the treasurer, and there was some confusion that happened.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Did the staff have any comments on any of this?
No comments.
Okay, so
I'm happy to move the item,
okay.
the staff recommendation.
All right, so
and
we have...
Thank the staff for willing to look at revision later this year and much earlier than May. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion to accept the city's investment policy. Councilmember Wei?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and we have a second. Please vote by lights.
Motion carries unanimously.
Great. Thank you very much. That ends today's agenda, and the meeting is hereby adjourned.